The old world in which people lived before was destroyed. In an instant, people had to fight monsters simply for survival, and the life of the white-haired young man was no exception. During all the time spent in the new world, he had already managed to get used to what was happening, and now the young man could experience new battles with an impenetrable look. This happened day after day, for many months. In the first month, he had to face a huge horned monster in battle, and after a year, he had seen so many strange creatures that he stopped being surprised. So, in endless battles and struggle for survival, 10 whole years passed. With just one sword, the young man could cut down any monster. In truth, he knew no fear. Thus, he reached the strongest of all monsters. The dominant monster looked at the young man with pity and gave him a chance to surrender, since his world was destroyed. But the young knight was not going to give up. At least not now, when he was standing face to face with the cause of his suffering. The monster said that the guy was simply wasting his talent and offered him to become his sword. But the young man was extremely aggressive and hissed at the monster not to make him laugh. The next moment, he rushed into the attack, using all the anger that had accumulated in him over the past 10 years. The guy swung his weapon at the monster and was ready to kill him. But the monster dodged, his eyes glowing with red lights of undisguised anger. The next moment, the guy realized that the monster was not dodging. In fact, he was trying to grab the hero, but he didn't have time. The Demon King looked at the hero with pity and tensed up. The hero, meanwhile, was preparing for a new attack on his enemy. But suddenly, something changed, and this change made the hero surprised and begin to retreat. The Demon King attacked again, and again he missed. He said that no matter how the hero wriggles, for him he is nothing more than a worm. The attack hit the hero, causing him to fly back and gasp in pain. He flew backwards for several meters but managed to land on his feet and not fall. He charged forward with renewed vigor to attack the huge monster, trying to find its weak spot. But the monster inspired fear with his whole appearance. He looked invincible and very evil. It was not difficult for him to repel the hero's second attack. The monster was beginning to lose interest in this fight. The young man fell to the ground again. This time it was a little more difficult to get up, as the wounds were more painful. During all this time, the monster never even used his weapon. That's how skeptical he was about the young knight. Looking up, the knight noticed something on the monster's neck, a pendant with a shiny blue stone. At that moment, he was struck by the idea that this could be the Demon King's weak point. This time, when the monster swung at the knight, he didn't wait long, but immediately rushed into battle himself. He drew his sword and, with a mad spark in his eyes, rushed to attack, not at the monster, but at his amulet. The hero's sword cut through the air. He moved forward at breakneck speed to avoid the monster's attack. The moment the monster raised his sword over the hero, his fate was already decided. The sword blade did not touch the knight as originally planned. Strangely, the knight was still alive. Then the monster realized that his amulet, the one that gave him strength, was forever destroyed. He gritted his teeth at the realization, and his eyes turned even redder, cursing the boy. The knight had spent a lot of energy during this battle. Now he could barely stand on his feet. The broken amulet emitted a beautiful blue glow, which was especially noticeable in the darkness. The monster began to disappear little by little. He screamed hysterically, cursing everything at once until he dissolved into thin air. A huge, seemingly invincible monster simply disappeared into oblivion. The fair-haired boy had been badly hurt during the fight. Now he was finally able to lie down on the ground. All his clothes were soaked in blood, but for him it was worth it. His efforts were not in vain. At that moment, the knight tried to find the strength not to close his eyes. His eyelids were heavy, and he looked somewhere up. There was a beautiful starry sky above him. Somewhere out there in the middle of space, a comet was flying by. And on the ground, instead of a beautiful view, everything was burning with uncontrollable flames. Someone in black slippers was moving slowly through the city. This young man looked very focused, as if he was going to carry out some important task. His hair was jet black and his eyes glowed red. In the place where he wanted to go, there was a siren light hanging on the fence, flashing red. This place was the Gate of Namsan. The mechanical voice of the alarm asked to scan the registration number. Unregistered heroes and civilians were asked to refrain from entering. This place was in Seoul, Yongsan district. The young man stood in front of the gate, deep in thought. The next moment, as if nothing had happened, he jumped over the fence to the other side. All the gates immediately began to close automatically, raising dust. There was a commotion, and the mechanical voice of a siren sounded the alarm and that an unregistered hero had entered through the gate. The young man quickly glanced around to get an idea of where he was. He ran to some part of the forest beyond the gate. Now that the alarm had been raised, he had to avoid being caught. So he walked forward calmly, as if he knew what he was doing. Not even 2 minutes had passed when someone's interested voice called out to him. This made the young man stop. A group of 4 people in uniform called out to the boy, asking if he was lost. One of them said he didn't know what happened to him, but he could go with them. The young man realized that the notice of the intrusion must not have reached these people yet. Meanwhile, the group members began to discuss the fact that this guy was dressed too strangely to be a hero. They said that in their time, porters dressed more casually, but the young man's outfit was still a bit odd. They also made a couple of comments about his backpack, not noticing how the guy turned in the other direction. They thought that this young man was one of those stupid porters who had been abandoned by the heroes with whom they had arrived. At that moment, the young man finally spoke. He said that he understood what they were trying to say, but he just came in there. A member of that group immediately started screaming that the guy had definitely been screwed. The leader of the squad said that he had seen many people like this guy and he understood what he was thinking when he passed through the gate, but going to find the gate for fun was stupid. First, you had to get a hero certificate. The young man said he understood that the man was trying to help him, but he did not feel particularly grateful. After this statement, the whole group stared at him as if he were crazy. The young man turned around and went his way, and the 4 people continued shouting among themselves. But the gang leader was neutral about it. He said that if someone neglected care like that, they would only learn from their own experience. He also said that the gate was nothing like what people see on TV. But at that moment, something changed. A huge green monster looking threatening suddenly appeared next to the young man. The monster's eyes glowed with malice, as if he had found his prey after several months. He laughed at how easy it would be to kill this young man. The guy deftly took his backpack off his back and was ready to join the fight at any moment. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, as if he had been waiting for this moment for a long time and wanted to enjoy it. The next second, the monster began to attack. He raised his weapon to strike, but the young man dodged. His brown eyes were shining. He said something about 10 years having passed. This opponent's sword seemed extremely sharp. It looked heavy and threatening. But when the weapon missed its target, the monster became confused and stared at its enemy. All this only to realize that this young man was already attacking him from the side, swinging his fist. He punched the monster without even using any weapon, which was quite strange. And with one blow, he knocked off the monster's head. Now this huge creature will never give anyone trouble. The young man landed on the ground next to the body of the monster he had killed. His movements looked extremely precise. His hand was bloody, but he didn't care. All he could think about now was that it really didn't make any difference. Having risen to his feet, the guy began to look for something with his eyes, as if he had forgotten something. Then, noticing something, he reached out his hand, trying to pick it up. The next moment, he had a weapon in his hand. This blade was not very good, but it was not bad either. The young man looked at the weapon with a strange look, trying to assess its value. And then he pointed the tip of the blade at the body of the monster he had just killed. He wanted to find something there. The next moment, blood gushed from the body of the monster who had died only recently. The young man dug into the huge wound with the newly acquired blade, desperately trying to get something out. After several dozen seconds of effort, something resembling a drop appeared in his hand. It was one of the low-level magic stones. They were so insignificant before that he wouldn't even look at them. But now everything has changed, and the young man put even such an insignificant thing in his backpack. He continued to rummage through his backpack for some time, trying to properly rearrange all the things stored there. And then the boy heard strange sounds coming from the bushes nearby. Something was definitely hiding there. And as if reading thoughts, several pairs of legs of those monsters who were preparing an ambush immediately appeared from there. They all rushed at the young man, ready to cut off his head at any moment for having just killed one of their comrades. But the guy continued to look at this whole pile with an inscrutable expression on his face, as if he didn't care about anyone or anything. The next moment he pulled back his hand, which until that moment had been clutching something. The young man had that same low-level magic crystal in his hand, and now he was ready to attack his opponents with that crystal. Sensing something was wrong, one of the attackers rushed to retreat, while the second looked at the young man in shock. A few moments later, another headless monster fell to the ground. His tribesmen, apparently determined to avenge their brother, drew their blades and headed towards the young man. He had expected this outcome, and so was not surprised by anything. On the contrary, this was what he had hoped for. The group of heroes he had met earlier were still making their way through the trees. The red-haired girl started talking about that annoying guy they met earlier. She was a little worried and asked what if he really died, to which her teammate asked if she was worried about him. The man, who had previously acted as the team leader, interrupted the conversation between two people. He said that if this guy was an outsider, the agents from the control center would have been here by now. This place was the gate of C-rank Namsan. Therefore, elite agents of B rank or higher would be deployed. Summing up what was said, the man added that if that guy did not recklessly rush at the monsters, he would not die. They talked about how that guy was probably shaking with fear and waiting for the agents, but in reality, it was the monsters who were shaking with fear. The young man was just dealing with another monster, cutting off its head. This was already the third monster that dared to attack this boy and said goodbye to life. The monsters' swords fell to the ground one after another as their souls gradually left their bodies. One of the remaining surviving monsters suddenly noticed the new change of stop, but it was too late to turn around. The same young man was attacking him from behind. He was swinging his leg and also preparing his fist for a second attack. Needless to say, the second attack was not needed. After the kick, the monster coughed up an impressive amount of blood. That's how all those poor attackers died. These monsters used to be feared, and now someone dealt with them like this. The young man dragged along another blade, taken from the monster, and was going to cut up their bodies again in order to get the stones. He swung his arm and said with a gleam in his eyes that there would be 3 more magic stones here. This could not but please him. It was a hot summer day outside. There were not many clouds on the horizon, and the sun was shining brightly. This boy's black backpack currently contained a few low-ranking magic stones, but for now, that was fine with him. The harvest was not rich. He collected only 12 low-level stones and 6 medium-level stones. Coming out of his thoughts, the guy realized that an agent had been running after him for some time. This was not good. But he did not have time to go too far, because the next moment the tramp of several pairs of feet was heard. Behind him were 4 agents, all dressed in black suits and all wearing black glasses. Their leader announced that they had arrived from the gate control center and asked to provide a hero's ID or go with them to the center. The young man looked at the agents as if they were a bunch of brainless creatures and asked about the cost control center. The second agent joined the conversation, not wanting to answer any questions. He asked to cooperate with them and follow instructions. The young man who had just been caught by the agents was clearly not happy with this situation and wanted to get rid of them as soon as possible. He turned around and was about to quickly retreat, saying what a hassle it was. The agents once again asked him to do what he was told, and also began to frantically and quickly take out handcuffs. They said that if he refused to follow their orders, they would be obliged to use force against him. The next second, the agent's pale hand grabbed the young man, not allowing him to take a single step. Although the agents looked scared, they still recited the memorized script about how the young man would do better to go with them downtown. But the boy took control of the situation, threatening to break the arm of one of the agents. The white-haired agent certainly didn't expect that. His eyes widened in surprise and the pain inflicted on his arm. The young man looked at him with a look full of hatred and asked him to leave him alone and not interfere in his affairs. The other agents, who also looked strange, took out all their weapons and were ready to attack at any moment. Their weapons looked like strange iron poles. It was quite impressive. These poles were magic weapons of the 4th class. They might work on ordinary orcs, but nothing more. Noticing that they were preparing to attack him, the young man broke the unfortunate agent's arm. He said this was the last warning. His words sounded quite impressive, and his actions confirmed it. The young man ordered the agents to get out of his sight right now if they didn't want to suffer even more. After all, their weapons weren't valuable enough to kill them. The brunette leaned back sharply, barely tensing his arms. He was already ready for a massacre with the agents of the control center. When the men pounced on him, the hero didn't even move. It was as if he was deflecting their blows with light touches. When one of the employees tried to knock him out, the brunette easily dodged the oncoming blow. And then, just a moment later, the brunette suddenly jumped forward, crushing the green grass under his feet. One of the employees tried to take advantage of this by following him, but the brunette kicked the man in the stomach. Blood started to flow from the mouth of the employee of the center. His colleague opposite froze for a second in surprise, looking at the boy. But a moment later, that colleague was lying on the ground too. The brunette threw him away with just one blow to the stomach. But there was still one gate control center employee behind him. He froze in surprise, clutching his sword tighter. His face was sweating heavily from fear and fatigue. He bowed his head angrily, sighing heavily. But the brunette looked quite indifferent, examining the face of the last enemy. He only shook his head slightly. But just a moment later, the image of the boy in the eyes of the center employee seemed to begin to blur. The man shook his head, not understanding where his enemy could have disappeared to. It seemed as if the employee was so afraid that he didn't even move. But the brunette appeared right behind him. Swinging, the hero struck the employee in the stomach, throwing him back. The control center employee dropped to one knee, trying to recover from the powerful blow. The middle-aged man looked at the young boy with bewilderment. He rose from his knees, clutching his chest. The brunette asked if there were any problems left. He replied that as long as the law was not being broken, there was no point in sending agents. But suddenly the brunette asked about information about the rift. The employee raised a surprised look at the boy. This is a passage to a world that gives birth to monsters. The new energy resource is stones that are obtained from hunting monsters. Therefore, the gates are under the control of the state, and this space, which could not be closed, was called a rift. The brunette said that they all didn't care which gate he went through, because the center's employees would still be looking for him. The boy insisted that it would be easier for the gate control center to accuse him of trespassing or something else. The employee replied that if an unregistered hero enters the gate, agents are dispatched immediately. The agent exclaimed that the rift was harder to enter than the gate. He also added that the Hero Association would probably intervene. But the brunette, just flashing his yellow eyes, replied that he didn't care about it. He just decided to walk past the agent. The agent knew he had to immediately notify headquarters about this madman, but then the brunette suddenly grabbed the employee's face. Then the brunette hit the man with all his might, throwing him back. The agent's eyes widened in fear and pain. With one sharp movement, the brunette with yellow eyes threw the agent away from himself. He flew towards a tree that stood nearby. Then the brunette sighed heavily, looking at the body of the employee behind him. He thought that there was nothing special about it. But the agent shouted at the boy that he was just an ordinary bastard, and the brunette had already turned around and hurried away. The employee of the center shouted that next time he would definitely come to this bastard. The brunette did not pay attention to this. A strange picture suddenly appeared before my eyes. It was as if fragile crystals were falling from the ceiling. The man screamed loudly and shrilly. He did not want to accept his fate, falling into the depths. The blonde thought about that dying scream that had pierced his ears. He remembered that feeling, as if he was being pulled somewhere. Now, floating in the void, the blonde understood that in the usual sense this had always been considered death. The blonde closed his eyes as if submissively awaiting his future fate in the new world. But, as if sensing the change, the blonde man with golden hair opened his eyes and they were bright blue. Now the blue-eyed blonde was in heaven, with some of his clothes torn and his body hanging upside down. The blonde asked who was standing in front of him. It was a young boy with dark hair and yellow eyes. The guy immediately replied in confusion that his name was Seo Do-jun. He awkwardly said that he was dying. Seo Do-jun, with his hand on his chest, quietly swore that he would disappear quietly if the blonde listened to his request. But the blonde suddenly interrupted him. He abruptly refused the dying guy, casting an indifferent glance at Jun. Then, Seo Do-jun immediately lowered his gaze, sighing heavily. It was as if he had decided that everything was useless from now on. Suddenly looking away from his blue eyes, the blonde said that he did not regret his life at all. The hero said that after 10 years of fighting, his friend turned out to be a traitor, the country was destroyed, and his family and comrades died. Recalling the outline of the castle, the man said that he wanted to live a bright life, but now it seems like nothing. And the blonde suddenly said that Seo Do-jun also knew this feeling. The boy awkwardly looked away. With his head down, Jun said that this was how he lived. But his grandmother, or Yoon Young, shouldn't have to go through that. The blonde just let out a tired breath and shook his head, irritably asking what the boy in front of him meant. The blue-eyed hero asked Seo Do-jun what he wanted. He couldn't help but smile brightly and sincerely in response. And then, placing his hand on his heart, Seo Do-jun told the hero about his sincere dreams and desires. Then, after some time, the Seoul-Gasan Digital Complex, Gumyaeon District, appeared before the eyes of that hero. The building is now known as the Hero Complex, and the turnover of magic stones from the gates has exceeded the turnover of IT companies. Seo Do-jun walked past the crowd of people, heading to only one specific place in the complex. After a while, bright signs appeared before the hero's eyes. He immediately wondered whether he should go there. When Seo Do-jun walked in, he saw the guy. He greeted him cheerfully without taking his eyes off the phone in his hand. Jun said he wanted to sell the magic stones. The seller exclaimed that they offered the best prices in all of Korea. And then the brunette immediately, with sharp and careless movements, took out several bright red stones from his backpack. The seller, however, felt disgusted. He mentally condemned Seo Do-jun for not wiping the blood off the stones before selling them. The salesman said that while he was sorting through the goods, Seo Do-jun could drink coffee. After a while, the seller had to carefully wipe the blood off all the stones, while Jun enjoyed his coffee. The seller began listing the grades of stones and their quantities, saying that the commission would be 40% of the price. The man smiled brightly as he said that for all the stones, Jun would receive 5,460,000 won. Jun walked closer to the seller and said that he did all the work himself, so for another 40% commission. The salesman smiled and replied that the commission was usually 45%, but theirs was only 40%. The seller said that the brunette could take the stones, but he reminded that no one would offer Seo Do-jun a higher price. But when the brunette began to collect his stones, the seller suddenly hit him on the hand, not allowing him to move. The salesman said that Seo Do-jun had to pay for the appraisal of the stones and a cup of coffee. He named the amount as 40,000 won. The seller also said that the blood on the stones had ruined the towel. Seo Do-jun sighed, saying that he had no money. The shopkeeper chuckled, saying that their store was being looked after by C-rank heroes, so Jun wouldn't be able to just leave. And then, several men came out of the room behind the salesman. They were of impressive height and had a strong build. The hero with a scar on his face asked if the seller had any problems and what was the reason for calling them. And then the brunette immediately turned around, carefully examining the face of his enemy. The man with the scar looked at the boy below him in bewilderment. His mouth barely opened in surprise as he looked at Seo Do-jun. The salesman hid behind the counter, his body shaking slightly and sweat appearing on his face. Then one of the heroes cried out loudly, falling on the seller. He tried to protect himself with his hands. The brunette managed to knock out the C-rank hero with one blow. Now he was lying unconscious on the table, and next to him lay two more of the same heroes. Seo Do-jun sighed with his hand, turning around. The seller hid under the table, and then the man walked closer to the only person who remained conscious. Seo Do-jun leaned on the broken table and then said that the commission should only be 1%. Seo Do-jun's eyes sparkled brightly as he said that from this day on, they would only make profitable deals. The salesman said that he would wait for Seo Do-jun again, and before the hero's eyes were already the signs of his store. Then after a while, Seo Do-jun threw a small wad of money, held together with a rubber band, onto the table. The grandmother and her granddaughter were very surprised, their eyes wide with amazement. They clearly did not expect to see such a sum of money. Carefully taking the bills in her hands, the granny asked in bewilderment where Seo Do-jun got such a large amount of money. Seo Do-jun replied that he once lent money to a friend who wanted to start a business, and his business became very profitable. Seo Do-jun's grandmother still didn't fully believe her grandson. She asked again if Seo Do-jun really had such friends. Then the brunette smiled softly and awkwardly, saying that he had communicated with that friend where he grew up. Then, Granny's questions immediately disappeared. She just looked down at the stack of money in her hands. But Seo Do-jun's sister just smiled brightly and asked if they would really become rich now. The brunette smiled brightly in response and scratched his sister's head. He said that now they were really rich. Seo Do-jun's sister began to happily run and jump around the room, saying that they were now rich. Seo Do-jun watched his sister with some pity and sympathy. She was smiling brightly and laughing. The real Seo Do-jun came to his mind, asking him to take care of his grandmother and Yoon-young. The brunette asked for his loved ones to live in a safe house. After these words, Jun immediately disappeared, not giving the blonde a chance to answer. Finally, Seo Do-jun's sister threw her arms over her brother's shoulders. He turned away, looking at himself in the mirror. He remembered that when he woke up, he had already become the new Seo Do-jun. Jun thought about the fact that the safest house in Korea currently costs 110 billion won. The brunette understood that he was not obliged to fulfill a one-sided promise, but if he could get his power back, the money would become nothing. Seo Do-jun knew that the rifts, gates, and monsters in this world were much weaker than those in his fallen world. He, as a god of the sword, recalled the horrors of his world, realizing that now for him it was just a child's play. The boy looked down, knowing that he still hadn't recovered even a tenth of his strength. Suddenly there was a knock on Seo Do-jun's door and loud calls for him. Granny and Yoon-young tensed up at the sounds. Seo Do-jun smiled brightly and said that he would go check who came to him. The sister froze. As he approached the front door, the man slowly opened it, stepping out of his apartment. There were two men standing in front of him. They both had fairly strong bodies, but Seo Do-jun didn't care. The men said that Seo Do-jun should learn to pay back his debts. It turned out that the boy's debt was 48 million won. Jun exhaled, realizing that the real Jun had borrowed 5 million won from them before he died for his grandmother's treatment. The men said that Seo Do-jun had earned money from the gate, so it was time to pay off the debt. The blonde smiled brightly, asking not to be surprised, but he was immediately hit with all his might by Seo Do-jun, Then Seo Dojun hit the second creditor, who immediately fell to the cold floor behind him. The blonde froze in surprise, clearly not expecting such skills from the simple boy in front of him. The creditor turned to his friend in fear, exclaiming loudly. Seo Dojun froze in place. Jun reminded that he had already paid more than 9 million won, so it was he who should demand the money back. The creditor immediately recoiled from the man in fear, asking if it was really Seo Dojun in front of him. The brunette swung again, asking to convey to the god of creditors that he would definitely come to them soon. And then it seemed as if even the tower was shaking from the force of the man's blow. A loud cry was heard. After some time, a fairly large shopping center appeared before the hero's eyes, in which there were many people. The man's gaze fell on a large shelf where many different teddy bears were displayed. They seemed to glow. Young, as if under a spell, asked if she was sure she could have the new doll. Her eyes were shining brightly. Seo Dojun said that they had already bought clothes, so now Young can take absolutely whatever she wants. He thought that as he delved deeper into Seo Dojun's memories, his own faded emotions began to return to him. He smiled brightly as he watched Young happily looking at the dolls. She sat down in front of the shelf. He thought that for now only empathy had returned to him, because June had always been kind to his half-sister. Then the guy turned away with a smile, thinking that now he would protect this feeling. The girl picked up a small rabbit and asked her brother if she could buy this doll. Then Seo Dojun began to look at the small and sad rabbit that Young was holding tightly in her arms. And then Seo Dojun gave his sister the big teddy bear that she had been looking at on the shelves for so long. Seo Dojun smiled brightly, reminding himself that he had told his sister to take anything. He grabbed the toy's head tightly. In response, Young smiled even brighter, awkwardly scratching her neck. She laughed loudly, looking at her brother. Then the brother and sister saw 2 trays with different food. After going to the shops, they wanted to have a snack. Seo Dojun decided to get himself something healthier and more filling, but Young got a burger and fries. But all of a sudden, Seo Dojun was called by several guys behind him. He turned around with interest. Behind the brunette stood a middle-aged woman, and next to her were 2 bodyguards. They were all looking at Seo Dojun. The blonde said that Seo Dojun looked like a loser in that outfit. She also asked who was sitting next to him. The woman assumed that Seo Dojun had screwed up and that he had gotten someone pregnant, just like what happened to his mother. Hearing this, Seo Dojun naturally lost his temper immediately. He began to breathe heavily, looking at the blonde's face, and Young just looked at the faces of her new acquaintances in surprise. She didn't understand who this strange woman was. Seo Dojun thought about what he should do in this situation. He looked gloomy. The woman who was just about to insult him was a little surprised by such a reaction to her words, but continued to look with a smirk. At this time, Dojun's sister was calmly eating her burger and looking at her brother. The scary woman turned to Dojun's sister and asked her name, to which the girl introduced herself as Lee Young. The woman immediately began to say disapprovingly that the girl was dressed strangely and that she was exactly like her mother. She then turned to Dojun and asked if her judgment was correct, her face still holding a disapproving grimace. The guy gritted his teeth, trying to fight the urge to hit this tactless woman. She asked him why he had suddenly gone quiet. Still waiting for no answer, the woman grimaced even more. She stared silently at Dojun, who still hadn't said anything. Then her expression surpassed all the scary grimaces from horror movies, and she turned to her sister Dojun again. The girl asked the girl if she knew what the word slut meant. It was a pretty weird question to ask a child. At that moment, something flashed in Dojun's eyes. He couldn't stand the bullying from this woman any longer. A rough and shrill male voice was heard saying that this girl was as ugly as an orc. The annoying woman turned towards Dojun with a look of complete confusion on her face. Dojun was so angry that the veins on his face showed. He had no intention of hurting this woman in the first place. Seo Dojun was born out of wedlock and lived in poverty. His mother died when he was 7 years old, and his father reluctantly accepted him into his new family. The boy lived for 10 years, suffering neglect and insults. After his stepmother gave birth to a son, Dojun was made to understand that he was superfluous, and they kicked him out successfully. Thus, he was forced to move in with his maternal grandmother and his sister. These people became, for a time, the thing in his life that kept him trying. How did Dojun's tormented heart endure all this? But now everything will be different, because the former hero decided to take control of Dojun's life. Dojun stood up and said that even though they had lived together with this woman for 12 years, she was still just as disgusting. He told her everything he thought about her brick face and how stupid she was. This woman's bodyguards didn't understand what they were supposed to do in this situation because Dojun had never been like this before. Dojun also said that she was simply jealous of everyone who was kinder and more beautiful, and that she had no reason to be superior to this girl. When he spoke about this girl, he meant his sister, who took care of him. At this moment, his expression looked quite confident. This was clearly not natural for the old Dojun. After these words, the woman again made a strange face and asked him to repeat what the boy had just said. Suddenly, a beautifully dressed woman appeared from somewhere. She greeted Dojun, but her face still showed a certain coldness. This woman was the mother of the mentally disabled woman who had just dared to insult Dojun's sister. The girl cried into her mother's shoulder, complaining about Dojun, but her mother did not support her. The woman looked very irritated with the way her daughter behaved. She asked her daughter how she could behave so uncultured, and then the woman smiled at Dojun and spoke to him. She asked how he was doing. This woman had been tormenting Jun for 12 years, and now, as if nothing had happened, she was telling him that he could at least come home sometimes. She said with the same smile that his father was very worried about him, but her speech was interrupted by Dojun's voice. He said that he and this woman were nobody to each other, and he was not in the mood to chat about personal matters with strangers. And then, with a strange expression on his face that evoked fear, he asked the woman to get lost. She immediately darkened beyond recognition, but everything he said was sincere, so she should leave quickly. After weighing the pros and cons, she simply turned around and walked away. Her daughter looked confused, but followed her mother. The woman couldn't believe that this young man was the Seo Dojun she knew before. The woman's daughter finally started running after her. The two were immediately followed by bodyguards. Seo Dojun looked confident. He was glad that he could finally stand up to these women. His sister was surprised. Seo Dojun, who would not say a word in response and would meekly endure all insults, no longer existed. The young man thought that it would be much better if the evil stepmother realized this simple truth sooner. Meanwhile, dusk fell on the city, and that terrible woman and her daughter were riding in the car. Her daughter kept asking her mother why she didn't do anything to Seo Dojun, why she didn't crush him like an idiot. She complained so ardently about how he had somehow insulted her that it was painful to watch. But the woman didn't pay attention to her daughter's reaction. She asked Manager Lee why Seo Dojun was still alive. Manager Lee replied that he was informed that Dojun was escorted outside the gate and left there. Now the girl finally lost her temper. She screamed about how the idiot who was supposed to die was somehow still breathing. Manager Lee promised to find out what was wrong, and the woman's daughter asked, confused, what she meant by must die. Seo Dojun's stepmother looked ahead meaningfully and had no intention of answering her daughter's question. But her daughter did not calm down. She continued to ask again what exactly her mother meant. This girl couldn't understand why her mother was going to kill Dojun, or if she was going to kill him at all. Then her daughter had some kind of realization. She asked if her mother still liked someone. But then the girl corrected herself, convincing herself that everything was not so at all, because if her grandfather or father found out about this, it would be bad. In the middle of this monologue, the girl's mouth was shut by her own mother. She did not want to listen to the nonsense that her daughter was talking any longer. The woman looked at her daughter with anger in her eyes and said that no matter what happened, Mom would sort it out. Her mother asked her to mind her own business. Tears of fear began to gather in the girl's eyes. The car rushed along the dark streets. The girls sitting inside were thinking about their own things. The evil stepmother thought that she had to get rid of the little brat by any means necessary, no matter what it cost her. 10 years ago, fault zones appeared. These zones were closed, but over time, monsters began to emerge from them and kill people. Due to the rift zones, the world was plunged into absolute chaos, where there was no longer light. But with the appearance of heroes, this new world was brought under control relatively quickly, and people also learned to obtain magic stones from monsters. When magic stones became a new source of energy, countries around the world cooperated to turn rifts into gates. Now the entire industry revolved around the gates and heroes. In other words, now you had to be a hero to earn money. Seo Dojun got out of the taxi thinking about what he needed to do next. He found himself in front of the HCS Capital building of Yeongdong. The building was quite old and the windows were covered with advertisements. The guy slowly walked into the building thinking about what might await him inside. After all, this Seo Dojun wasn't very familiar with the structure of this world, even though he had all the memories. The entire building was filled with the smell of cigarette smoke, and in the middle of the room sat a man smoking. There were 2 men standing behind him. None of the 3 looked friendly. The man put out his cigarette on the table and complained that Dojun had beaten up his guys and now had come here. Dojun sat down on a chair and said that no matter how he looked at it, Their impudence surprised him. He didn't let the men say a word and continued to talk about how he was entitled to compensation for moral and physical damage. In his opinion, this boy had been through the gate and had experienced awakening. The head of the company said that he, therefore, was a week short of awakening and already got all excited. He offered to show him an example of what happens to someone who awakens and immediately turns up their nose. 3 men, similar to the bodyguards of this company leader, immediately burst into the negotiation room. There were too many hostile men in the room now. The current Du-jun could handle even that. The head of the company again spoke about how there were some arrogant people who only awakened at D rank. And according to him, his guys could easily show the particularly spirited D ranks where the crayfish spend the winter. But Du-jun wasn't afraid for his life at all. He still remained calm. In a calm, deep, and at the same time frightening voice, he ordered the owner of the company to sit down. Seo Du-jun looked at the company owner and added his own phrase about what he hadn't finished yet. One of the bodyguards immediately pounced on him because Do-jun dared to address the manager so familiarly. But the next moment, all the fighting spirit of this man was broken as someone pulled his glasses. Then came the blow. All the other bodyguards stared at Seo Do-jun with complete bewilderment in their eyes. The young man threw the bodyguard back several meters with one blow and without any extra effort. Then the next bodyguard got into trouble. Du-jun asked them if they were really involved in more than just usury. He then turned on the third and said that he knew that this office was also falsifying documents. Now he really needed a hero's certificate to earn money almost legally. The fourth bodyguard expressed a desire to attack Do-jun, but his attempt was also not particularly successful. Du-jun dodged his attack and attacked faster. These bodyguards were too insignificant. Just like that, after a few seconds, Seo Do-jun had scattered the 4 bodyguards to different corners of the room. He ordered these people to immediately make him a perfect document so that he would not have any problems in the future. The young man announced the next day as the deadline. The owner of this office's eyes widened at such a deadline. The 2 bodyguards were also shocked. They never expected that this young man could just throw them all around, and they didn't expect that he would demand such a thing. The owner of this place tried to estimate the strength before June. He did not understand what kind of strength it was. This person could not be lower than B rank. Du-jun immediately demanded an answer to his request, to which the moneylender bowed his head with respect and promised to fulfill everything. Then Du-jun touched the poor man's whips and wanted to tell him something else. Du-jun looked at the man and asked if Hong Hee-ju had given him instructions to kill him. The man immediately remembered how Du-jun's stepmother had come to him the other day with her strange request. So Du-jun squeezed his hands around the frightened man's neck and demanded an answer as soon as possible. How one of those bodyguards who had been in different corners of the room a few minutes ago came to his senses. But these bodyguards didn't intend to attack. They all started talking about Hong Hee-ju saying something. The loan shark said that Hong Hee-ju wanted them to drive Du-jun into debt. The man asked Seo Do-jun to let him go because he still wanted to live. Then the young man let go and threw the moneylender back and asked if it was he who had locked him in the gate. The man tried to deny it. He looked scared. He swore it wasn't him and that he wasn't lying. He folded his hands in a prayerful gesture and said that he would not lock him in the gates as it was not to his advantage. Du-jin thought for a few seconds, but he had no ideas yet. He didn't know who could have locked him up. Then he remembered something. The boy said the name Kang Cheol-woo. This name was completely unfamiliar to him, but Seo Do-jun knew that this Kang was the person who brought him and locked him in the gate. So he asked to find information about him. Then the young man turned and walked out of the building, leaving these unfortunates to deal with all his errands until the next day. After leaving the establishment, Seo Do-jun looked up at the sky. Today was once again one of those bright days. He remembered bits and pieces of that dialogue with the real Seo Do-jun. He remembered Du-jun asking him to protect his grandmother and Yoon-young. Now, the seasoned hero swore that while he was here, he would sort everything out, perhaps out of pity or perhaps out of mercy. The man held a gold card with his photograph attached to it. Then Seo Do-jun slowly placed the card on the small device. It immediately began to sparkle with a blue light. An automated voice was heard. It said that the hero's registration card had been accepted, but his level was below the recommended level. After hearing the warning, Seo Do-jun cursed softly. He said that the dealer should have upgraded to A rank. Seo Do-jun hurried inside the open door. The automated voice warned of danger again. The man entered the gate of the Night Island. The tunnel itself was considered B rank, and the size was D. June understood that solo playthrough was difficult due to the size of the gate, so it was difficult to get rid of non-A rank monsters. The man looked up, hoping that luck would be on his side this time. Then he chuckled, realizing that otherwise he would have to face hundreds of monsters in a dark and narrow tunnel. A moment later, a huge snake with fangs appeared in front of him. Seo Dojun recoiled, avoiding the blow of the monster's paws. Seo Dojun's eyes widened and he crossed his arms, preparing to attack. He whispered that he really liked it. The snake tried to kill the guest with its tongue, moving towards him. A moment later, it already went on a direct attack. But then, the monster decided to release its poison. It opened its mouth wide and its eyes lit up with a bright light. Seo Dojun understood that the poison of the black deadly viper could cause paralysis even with a light touch. The man then decided to kneel down, momentarily covering his head from the snake's impending strike. But, just a second later, Seo Dojun pushed off the ground with all his might, swinging for another attack. And then, the brunette finally delivered the decisive blow to the black viper, throwing its body back. The snake howled loudly. Seo Dojun then rushed away, avoiding the green drops of poison falling on his body. The brunette was wearing gloves which were still slightly poisoned. These drops immediately burned through the fabric. Seo Dojun said that for 300,000 won, these gloves weren't that bad. But then the brunette turned around sharply, as if expecting another blow from the enemy. His yellow eyes flashed brightly. Behind him there were now 4 black vipers, who were trying to kill and devour Seo Dojun. With just one blow, the man managed to defeat one of the vipers. It fell to the ground, almost choking on its own blood. Moments later, Seo Dojun dealt with the other monsters in the tunnel in the same manner. Green poison spurted from the mouth of one of the creatures again, and the drops rushed toward a man not far from it. And Seo Dojun managed to avoid the monster's attack again. But for a second, the man still froze in place. Having dealt with the monsters, Jun decided to find the stones in their bodies. But, as it turned out, there were no stones in anyone. He decided that everything here was the same as in the previous world, and the chance that the viper would contain a stone was 3%. Seo Dojun walked past the snake's corpse, knowing that he would have to catch several hundred more monsters. Moving further, Seo Dojun noticed several decomposed skeletons, and next to them were the remains of weapons. A strange black haze hovered around one of the skeletons. It passed through the skull of a long-dead hero. Slowly raising his eyes, Seo Dojun asked if the monster in front of him was the boss. The huge snake had already leaned towards him, examining the newly arrived guest with interest. Its eyes sparkled in the darkness. Seo Dojun threw his backpack off his back, saying that he was already lost anyway, but it was for the best. Seo Dojun jumped high into the air, striking the monster's face. He shouted that he had to finish this quickly. But the brunette couldn't land even one blow on the monster. For a second, Jun was stunned with surprise. Looking at the imprint of his hand on the wall, Seo Dojun realized that his attack had not worked. Seo Dojun was stuck in one of the stones of the tunnel. The man's eyes widened as he tried to get out of the trap. A second later, another loud blow rang out. The snake reached Seo Dojun with one sharp jerk. Then the brunette found himself pressed tightly against the wall. Seo Dojun lowered his head in pain, trying to catch his breath. The boss opened his mouth wide, intending to destroy the enemy. But Seo Dojun managed to quickly come to his senses at that moment. Literally at the last second, the man jumped away from the snake that was about to devour Seo Dojun. The man tried to grab onto the floor in order to stay on his feet in case of an attack by a black viper. Then, just a moment later, Seo Dojun lunged forward with all his might, swinging his arm for another attack. Seo Dojun struck the black viper again, trying to put all his strength into his strike. Then the brunette began to slowly watch the snake, moving away from the monster to a safe distance. Seo Dojun realized that this monster was on a different level than the vipers he had already defeated. The man frowned, deeply regretting that he had not yet been able to regain his own powers. He did not know what would happen next. But suddenly the man's eyes widened as he turned back, his mouth barely open in surprise. The brunette noticed a weapon that was stuck in the ground next to the skeleton. For a second, Seo Dojun was speechless. He froze in place, carefully examining the weapon in front of him. It seemed as if the world had stopped for a moment. Then Seo Dojun frowned and closed his eyes, but shaking his head, he looked at the sword again. Jun said he had no choice. Besides, he believed that it didn't matter how old the sword was, only the skill of the wielder mattered. The sword was quite dirty. Gripping it tighter in his hands, Seo Dojun headed towards the monster. When the monster wanted to attack the boy again, he pulled out his sword towards the viper in front of him. Seo Dojun quietly asked to borrow the sword for a moment, and then loud smashing sounds were heard. A moment later, Jun jumped high into the air, preparing to cut through the armor of the black viper in front of him. He swung again. Seo Do-jun's eyes widened, saying that this damn viper should be proud since he was the one who would kill her. Then the man's sword seemed to glow bright red. Seo Do-jun gripped the sword's hilt even tighter. And then the viper howled loudly in pain, releasing huge drops of green poison from its mouth. It seemed as if Seo Do-jun's eyes turned white for a moment as he prepared to strike the viper again. Seo Do-jun pierced the snake's body, and bright rays of sunlight began to emanate from the monster's body. A loud scream was heard. Small stones began to fall from the ceiling of the tunnel. Seo Do-jun stood there, tensely pressing his lips together. Behind him lay the corpse of a monster. Jun's sword broke into pieces, and then he realized that a catastrophe could have happened. Slowly approaching the monster's corpse, Seo Do-jun barely raised his head up. His movements were cautious. The man pulled a fang from the viper. Jun said it was a bit short for a two-handed sword, but it could be used for something useful. Closing his eyes, Seo Do-jun said tiredly that he was still glad, because it was better than Namsan. Seo Do-jun came out of the tunnel late at night. He couldn't believe that he had spent so much time on the B-rank gate. The man then clenched his fist, realizing that restoring his strength would now be his top priority. Looking up at the sky, Jun thought of his comrades from the past. He was glad that they couldn't see him in his current state. Next to the store in the Hero Complex, an animator in a strange yellow cat costume danced, attracting customers. A man stood in a shop. He laid out a large number of magic stones on the counter. The seller told him that the man had collected several high-level stones, but the commission would be 40%. The man said it was a bit expensive, so he asked for a discount since he was a regular customer. The seller said that they already had the lowest commission. He insisted that the control center charges a 5% commission. The salesman told the customer handing over the money that it was a clean and convenient deal at a good price. But in response, the man simply began to count the money he had received, thinking for a moment. The customer asked what happened to the salesman's face. He was badly beaten and had plasters all over his body. The seller said with displeasure that some psycho came to them out of nowhere and then beat him and the security guards. The client said that Al was too relaxed because of the guards. He thought that ranks were just for the convenience of bureaucrats, but real ability was different. The man insisted that there was a huge gap between a security guard who had just received his license and a hero who risked his life. Al silently told the customer to shut up. The man said that if the seller needed help, he could call him. Having laughed, the customer hurried out of the store, and a certain man came towards him. He was heading for the counter. It was Jun, who had already passed by the previous customer, and was looking indifferently at the salesman in front of him. Seeing the painfully familiar face, the salesman immediately frowned. He even opened his eye, which was very sore after the fight. And then, a moment later, Al was already shouting loudly, pointing his finger at the hero. He said that it was he who beat him up. The previous client asked again in surprise, saying that this guy was quite tall and looked neat. The man, flexing his fists, asked Jun if he really beats up civilians first and then calls himself a hero. Al smiled, thinking that the previous client was a 7-year veteran with many familiar heroes. But in response, Seo Do-jun only advised the man to leave. Then the salesman was surprised for a moment. Hearing the boy's insolence, the veteran immediately lost his temper. He frowned deeply, clenching his teeth even tighter. But the red-haired salesman didn't seem to care. He only smiled even brighter as he watched what was happening. Seo Do-jun turned around tiredly, looking at the man behind him. He asked if he really wanted to avenge his friend. Then the veteran tensed up even more, clenching his fists tighter. He called the brunette in front of him an ordinary kid. The veteran then remembered that most hero deaths were due to battles with other heroes, not monsters. Then the man awkwardly scratched his neck, saying that he urgently needed to leave on business. Turning around, he hurried away. Looking away from the veteran, Seo Do-jun turned his attention to the salesman standing behind him, who froze in surprise. Jun asked if the salesman had any complaints against him. Al bowed his head, immediately breaking out in a sweat of fear. But, as if ignoring the seller's expression, Seo Do-jun simply threw the backpack containing the magic stones at him. Seo Do-jun ordered the red-haired salesman to calculate how much he could get for these magic stones. El looked at the backpack full of high-level magic stones in surprise. He couldn't figure out who Jun was. But the seller decided to pay Seo Do-jun anyway, so he began to count the cost of each stone. The salesman said it was 150 million won. Then the man began to examine the stones. And Seo Do-jun was clearly unhappy that he had only received 150 million for a whole day of hunting. The salesman reminded him that he still had to deduct the commission. Meeting the angry look of the customer, Al became scared. So Dujun just exhaled, saying that everything was correct, and with the commission he came to 148.5 million. Al wanted to curse, but he only said that transactions over 100 million won required approval from his superiors. Seo Dojun responded with displeasure, saying that in that case the seller should get it right away. The red-haired salesman decided to call his boss, explaining the whole situation. He moved away from the cash register and switched to a whisper. Seo Dojun didn't let El finish speaking, taking the phone from his hands. The man froze in surprise for a moment. Seo Dojun took the phone in his hands, telling him to tell the seller to pay him the money for the stones. The boss replied that he understood everything but still asked to return the phone to the employee. But Jun turned his gaze to Al. A moment later, Seo Dojun threw the phone against the wall. The force of the impact made the wall seem to break into pieces. The man said that the seller's management had given his consent, so he should pay for the goods. The red-haired salesman sighed heavily and handed the man stacks of money. His voice trembled violently with fear. June smiled and said that next time everything should be fine. Elle didn't understand when coercion was the norm. 10 minutes later, the doors of the store were open again. A man hurried inside. The middle-aged brunette asked in fear why Al wasn't picking up the phone and what the last call was about. The red-haired salesman tiredly told his boss that he was quitting. He shook his head, looking away from his boss. Al kept saying he couldn't work like that anymore. The boss's gaze caught on the employee's phone on the wall. Then the chief's gaze immediately changed, became more strict and severe. The man frowned deeply. The salesman looked at the changes in his boss's face with bewilderment. For a moment, the guy was even surprised. A moment later, the boss finally decided to call one of his acquaintances. Her name was Ju Yan. Immediately after asking them to come to their store, the purple-haired girl headed towards them. People on the street looked at the girl, turned around and whispered. But Ju Yan didn't pay attention to it. The people standing around couldn't believe that they were able to see the real Hyun Ju Yan in person. The girl had violet eyes and long hair. Her bangs just barely touched her glasses, which sparkled in the sun. After passing through a huge crowd of people, Hyun Ju Yan stopped near a store where the stone trading was taking place. When the girl entered, a certain man greeted her warmly at the entrance. The red-haired salesman screamed loudly, either from surprise or joy. He also couldn't believe that he saw Hyun Ju Yan. The girl winked at the seller and smiled brightly, saying that it really was her. Al understood that the 4th S-rank hero stood before him. He heard that she was his boss's niece. The girl said that her uncle told her about problems with some hero who was forcing them to buy stones. Sitting down on the sofa, Hyun Ju Yan asked him to tell her more about the situation. She bowed her head tiredly. It was a warm day outside. Yun Young was playing with the toys she had been given in the yard of her house. At this time, Seo Do-jun was sitting nearby in the lotus position, trying to meditate. Even hunting all day long, he barely made 100 million. It was too slow. Seo Do-jun needed to start hunting alone in the highest rank gate as soon as possible. For this, he needed to immediately restore his former strength. But, unlike the previous world, in this atmosphere, mana was hard to find. At this rate, collecting mana would take 3 years. It would be nice to get hold of good weapons and equipment. However, in this world, even the worst weapons cost hundreds of millions. There was a sudden sound and Yun Young turned around, panic in her eyes. Seo Do-jun immediately ran up to the girl and picked her up in his arms, telling her to quickly go into the house. He threw the girl into the house and very quickly closed the front door behind them. A stunned grandmother watched this scene, asking what had happened. But the answer came by itself. A loud sound was heard from the street, which scared everyone in the house. The ground began to shake beneath her feet. Yun Young began to struggle against her grip, and her grandmother screamed about an earthquake. But Seo Do-jun knew that it was most likely not an earthquake. He had another guess. Seo Do-jun knew better than anyone that the rifts were too chaotic lately to be logical. And what had just appeared above their house was radiating similar energy, almost like a rift. This meant that the young man had reason to believe that they were at the epicenter of events, right under the new fault. Looking out the window, his suspicions were only confirmed. He saw that the entire sky was in purple cracks. The young man threw his sister into the arms of his bewildered grandmother and rushed towards the exit. He told his household that it was dangerous outside and forbade them to go out, and he himself threw himself into the rift. Meanwhile, there was a commotion in the majestic building of the Seoul Heroes Association. Numerous agents were walking around the office, worried that a new rift had been discovered in Mappo. The man in glasses was clearly indignant that a new rift had formed 63 days later. He ordered the agents to contact the White Lion Guild as soon as possible because they were closest to the scene. He asked again where exactly the location of the fault was recorded and was told that the fault appeared in the courtyard of a residential building. The man with glasses began to worry. It was problematic because if an ordinary person entered the new rift, others would not be able to enter it. And if that person dies, the waves of monsters will not stop for 10 whole days. If that happens, then all of Seoul will be in danger. Monsters will come out on the streets and start killing. The man with glasses asked about the identity of the person who entered the rift. One of the agents told him that the person's name was Seo Do-jun. He entered the rift zone trying to save his little sister. So according to the agent's assumptions, he was not a hero. On the screen of the small computer that calculated the chances of losing, a number almost equal to 100 popped up. At that moment, the entire office went dark. Now the future of all of Seoul was in the hands of someone who was not a hero. Meanwhile, in another corner of Seoul, an angry woman threw a pile of papers on the table. It was the same stepmother who asked the detective what Seo Do-jun's awakening meant. The man in the suit replied that even though Do-junyi had not yet registered with the Hero Association, there was no doubt that he had awakened in the gate. The woman lost her temper because she sincerely did not understand how her perfect plan could turn out like this. She slammed her fist on the table and shouted that Kang Cheol-woo should have killed that bastard. She asked Manager Lee to tell Kang Cheol-woo that if he couldn't kill Do-jun, he would pay a heavy price. The man replied that he doubted they would be able to contact him, as a new rift had appeared in the house before June. The unfortunate bodyguard said that they had confirmed that Do-jun had entered that rift, and that they would soon report it to the media. The woman was a little glad that they would no longer see this vile creature. She looked at her bodyguard with determination in her eyes and asked him to watch until he was completely convinced. And Seo Do-jun found himself in a rift. Not in the very epicenter, but in a rift. The sun was still shining brightly above his head. It was almost no different from the real world. The young man walked confidently among the trees, trying to understand where exactly he needed to go. Everything was going as well as it could. He couldn't believe that he was actually in the rift now. This rift was the very same Padasei forest where he often walked as a child. The shape of the forest, the trees, the grass, and of course the wind. It was all the same as it had been in his childhood. The atmosphere was rich in mana, and he also understood perfectly well where the exit from the rift could be. Seo Do-jun smiled and was glad that he had fallen into this particular rift. Walking a little further, he saw in front of him what was called the World Tree. It was an ancient sacred tree that emitted a stream of pure mana. It was in Do-jun's favor. The reason his world was destroyed was because that tree was burned, and the source of mana was lost. And it is not clear why, but this tree was still alive here, in this rift. This gave Seo Do-jun a unique opportunity to bring back the mana of that time. He resolutely headed towards the tree roots to try to get his former strength. Do-jun began to meditate again to quickly obtain mana. It was not an easy task. Magic power pierced his body and, because Seo Do-jun was not a good warrior in life, it was difficult to retain the mana. He had spent enough time in this rift. But the young man was ready to spend as much time as it took. Forgetting even about food and water, he concentrated only on breathing for 10 days. The night of the 10th day was suspiciously quiet. But so far there were no enemies in sight. Suddenly, in the midst of all the silence, footsteps were heard. This made Seo Do-jun's eyes widen. There, in the thicket of the forest, making their way from behind the trees, Vulcans approached the tree. These monsters were the ones who burned the World Tree in the past and doomed the world to eternal suffering. And now all these monsters were heading straight towards the tree, possibly trying to kill Do-jun. The young man thought that it would be very nice to have a sword with a water attribute on him now, but this would do too. The Vulcan were attacking the guy, moving very quickly towards him. Fire was coming out of their heads, and they looked scary. Seeing how persistent his old enemies were, Seo Do-jun became furious. He no longer needed his sword. He had restored enough mana and was ready to crush these worthless creatures into pieces. The next moment, he gathered his mana into the palms of his hands and directed an attack towards the attackers. The Vulcan apparently did not expect any resistance. They clutched their heads in pain. Do-jun's eyes were empty. He could finally take revenge for his destroyed world. The Vulcans had no intention of retreating. Apparently, they did not understand how serious their enemy was. Seo Do-jun didn't even move or try to retreat. He was waiting for the right moment to attack. He planned to release the accumulated mana in the form of ki, and thereby cause an explosion. Seo Do-jun exhaled and thought that it had been a long time since he had spilled so much mana. The Vulcan were preparing to attack the World Tree, or Do-jun. They were gathering energy for the attack. The next moment, several purple clots of energy flew towards Seo Do-jun. Do-jun watched the approaching attacks for a while, knowing full well that they posed no threat to him. Indeed, The clots of energy stopped right in front of his body, as if they had been thrown back by the barrier, without ever touching him. Now that he was sure that the world tree was safe, Do-jun was ready to go on the attack. He looked at Vulcan with a crazy look and smiling, offering to test his mana in action. The young man slightly stretched his neck, which had become stiff from long meditation, and walked towards his opponents. The Vulcan were preparing to strike again. They were gathering energy in their mouths again. But this time, Seo Do-jun wasn't going to just watch. He stuck his hand into Vulcan's mouth. In this way, Do-jun tried to tear out this not yet formed clot of energy, and his attack succeeded. Blue light from his mana spilled across the area. The Vulcan members were acting rather strangely. Their heads would burst into flames again, then go out. And then they all fell down dead, crumbling into ashes. Each one dropped a magic stone. So Do-jun announced that his mana check was complete and headed towards the other Vulcan. The young man said with a smile that he had come up with a new plan. He turned to the bewildered Vulcan and asked if he would get the eternal sparks if he dealt with them. Then he answered his own question. The probability of sparks was indeed high. After thinking about how many sparks he would get, the young man began to hit Vulcan, throwing them left and right. After some time, Vulcan's attack came to an end. Seo Do-jun stood under a tree, about to count his catch. On the ground between a pile of magic stones lay something golden and shiny. Do-jun reached out his hand towards the object. This was what he had been hunting for all this time. Do-jun held one of those eternal sparks in his hands. He hadn't seen such an object for over 10 years. The young man clenched his fist, and the spark burst into flame. The young man was glad that he could find them again. Now an orange, uncontrollable flame was emanating from his palm. It looked quite menacing. This was the first time Seo Do-jun smiled in a while. He was really happy about the spark. He would like to obtain more mana from the world tree, but unfortunately, it would be too much for his body. But now he had this spark, which meant he could absorb them. It wasn't a mana replenishment, of course, but he now had the opportunity to change his mana to the fire attribute. After absorbing one spark, the boy's entire body began to emit light, and tongues of flame enveloped him. Seo Do-jun remembered how in the past he was completely uninterested in such sparks and literally threw them away. However, it was weaker now. Now, just absorbing a spark took 10 minutes. The young man looked at the pile of golden, shiny stones under his feet and thought of something. He decided that he must now absorb as many of these sparks as he could. People looked up in amazement as they saw the new rift. It sparkled with a bright purple light that was both fascinating and frightening. Reporters tried to capture as many moments as possible. The crowd screamed and whispered, unable to cope with the overwhelming horror. One of the men swore loudly, clenching his teeth tighter. He frowned deeply, not taking his gaze away from the rift. Bang Sung-woo was one of the agents at the control center. He told his colleague that this hell was all because of one guy. Kim Hyun-woo replied that the guy just wanted to save his sister. He looked at his watch and smiled brightly. Bang Seon-woo exclaimed that this was only the official version, but in fact, the guy had heard about light awakenings in the rifts. But his colleague interrupted him and asked what Kil Ma-hyun thought. But she told them to just follow the instructions. The guy with blue hair replied that faults also occurred in the USA, China, Britain, Turkey, and Switzerland. Kim Hyun-woo said that Kil Ma must have a lot of problems because this is the first time something like this has happened. Bang Sung-woo exclaimed that in the end, they were the only ones left in the red. He believed that all of this happened because of a useless idiot. The agent exclaimed that if that guy came out of the rift, he would beat the crap out of him. But the rift only grew wider with each passing second. It formed in the air, growing like stalks. The news said that it had already been 28 days since the rift opened, and the Hero Association announced a wave of monsters. They showed Seo Do-jun's blurred face. They said that this ordinary person had gone in first and hadn't come out yet. But a moment later, as if not wanting to even hear about this stupid chatter, a certain man turned off the TV screen. The man who had been watching TV with boredom earlier let out a heavy sigh and said that that person was Seo Do-jun. Kim In-gu, who came up behind his boss, said that it was definitely Seo Do-jun, since it had already been confirmed. Hwang Jong-sub asked how likely it was that he would return alive. The assistant replied that it was unlikely that the man would be able to leave there, but in response Hwang Jong-seob only laughed, saying that that bastard was clearly not a human being. The boss said that those idiots from the Hero Association were misinformed. He looked at his beaten subordinates. Hwang Jong-seob suddenly asked if it was possible that Seo Do-jun was awakened. After bowing, the assistant said that it all depended on Seo Do-jun's rank, so it was difficult to judge. Relaxing for a moment, Hwang Jong-seob said that fighting well and surviving in the rifts were two different things. The boss said that Seo Do-jun still has 2 living family members, so they need to be checked. Kim En-gu asked what he wanted to do with them. Hwang replied that he planned to just keep them safe for now. Hwang Jung-sung said that if Jun died, they would sell his family for organs. If the guy came back, they would hang a debt on him for taking care of his family. Before the guy's eyes, there was a huge tree, inside of which a portal of sky blue color seemed to open. Seo Do-jun's body was engulfed in bright flames. His eyes were glowing white. He didn't know how much time had passed. He looked at his hand, realizing that this was what was called the unquenchable spark, which he had absorbed by the hundreds. Jun understood that he could now use fire mana whenever he wanted, and his fire resistance had increased greatly. Jun was pleased that if only the fire attribute was counted, he was in better shape than when he was called the Sword God. Then the brunette barely touched the tree trunk, closing his eyes for a moment. Then the man began to whisper softly, looking at the mighty tree in front of him. It seemed as if bright sparks were floating around. Seo Do-jun thanked the peace tree for everything it had given him over these 2 lives. The man then knelt down and began to collect the magic stones, which sparkled with a bright red light. The man collected the stones in a bag and sat down on the ground in front of the tree. He said that he would probably never see the Tree of Peace again. Smiling, the boy promised that if they met again and the tree was in danger, he would protect it at any cost. Then Seo Do-jun finally stood up from the ground and turned around. He was finally about to leave the rift. A few moments later, the moon appeared before his eyes, illuminating the night streets of Seoul. When Jun came out of the portal, his face seemed to respond with bright flashes of fire. It was as if he was pushed out of the rift. Then the guy landed on the ground and tried to keep his balance. He almost tripped. After quickly surveying the area, Seo Do-jun realized that all the residents had been evacuated in preparation for the wave. But looking towards a certain house, the guy felt someone's presence in that direction. That's why Seo Do-jun decided to run there as quickly as possible and check who was there. Kim Hyun-woo was standing there, once again making fun of the ever-disgruntled Bang Sung-woo. Jun carefully peeked out from around the corner. Seo Do-jun frowned and quickly realized that if those guys from the center caught him, it would cause big problems. And then the guy decided to use his new abilities, turning the air around his hand into a bright flame. Then the flames swirled around Seo Do-jun. The boy directed the flames upward with one easy movement. Just a moment later, the fire had already reached the highest roof of all those nearby. For a moment, everything was quiet. Seo Do-jun just watched what was happening, not moving from his place. And a moment later, there was a loud explosion. Suddenly, the whole house was in flames. Some of the remains of the building flew down. Kim Hyun-woo immediately turned around in fear, asking what that sound was. Bang Sung-woo's eyes widened in surprise. Agents from the gate control center immediately rushed to the blazing building. The fire was spreading more and more with each passing second. A small crowd of ordinary people stopped near the building. Kim Hyun-woo froze in surprise, not understanding what was happening. Bang Sung-woo cursed, not understanding how such a big flame could appear in an ordinary building. Kim Hyun-woo frowned in response. Seo Do-jun also watched the fire from afar. But the only thing he could think of was that the fire's strength and accuracy were quite good. The brunette looked at his hand in surprise, thinking that such a flame should obviously impress those around him. Jun realized that he could be satisfied, because after all, in his past life, he was the most powerful fire mage on the continent. Suddenly, Kim Hyun-woo tilted his head forward, his eyes wide. He froze in place in sudden surprise. Turning around quickly, the blue-haired guy asked his colleague to pay attention to something. Kim Hyun-woo kept saying that the rift had become strange. It seemed to have shrunk in size. Bang Sung-woo asked again. Looking closer, they could indeed see significant changes in the rift. And then both agents from the control center rushed forward, trying to prevent a catastrophe. They ran forward. Bang Sung-woo, like his colleague Kim Hyun-woo, suddenly stopped in his tracks, his eyes wide in surprise. The boy frowned. It seemed as if the man was running out of air. The agent couldn't move, as if he didn't believe what was happening now. And then the boy loudly exclaimed that the rift was indeed disappearing. The purple portal began to shrink sharply. Seo Do-jun no longer followed the agents from the center. Throwing his bag over his shoulder, he hurried away from the scene of the incident. But still, after a couple of moments, the guy turned around. His yellow eyes seemed to sparkle brightly in the darkness. The next day, the news reported that the new fault in Mappo had disappeared early in the morning. This news was widely reported. The TVs were saying that the Hero Association that predicted the wave of monsters was already investigating the causes. Reporters also reported an unexplained fire that broke out at a dump near the fault. People on the streets were very surprised. The reporter said that Mr. So was probably already dead. People in the area started whispering that the guy deserved it. Some tried to protect June. Other passersby said that if the rift had not closed, Seoul would have become a battlefield. After hearing all the rumors, Seo Do-jun became upset because he realized that he would most likely never see the World Tree again. Looking up at the sky, Seo Do-jun adjusted his cap and hood. He had deliberately dressed very secretively, covering his face. Looking up at the sky with the bright sun, Seo Do-jun remembered that there were still things he had to protect. Approaching an old building, the man suddenly stopped. He began to carefully examine the signs on the walls. Then Seo Do-jun walked inside the house and noticed several guys in front of him. They were smoking, laughing loudly and talking. One of the guys said that since that bastard was dead, the old lady and the girl were finished too. The other guy said that they could get 10 times more than those bastards were actually worth. The brunette said that the girl could grow up to be very beautiful, so the boss was probably already thinking about how to use her. But suddenly, a third person intervened in their conversation. For a moment, the two guys froze, turning around in surprise. Seo Do-jun came closer to them, asking where their boss was. They were standing in an old room near the landing. After some time, the black car finally pulled up to the building. It seemed as if the house had been in need of repair for a long time. A man sighed heavily and slowly stepped out of the car. It seemed as if he was having a hard time even walking. It was a middle-aged man who decided to comb his hair, and behind him was his assistant, Kim In-gu. Hwang Jong-seob laughed, saying that since that guy was dead, he could finally sleep peacefully. Asking about the schedule, the boss immediately received an answer. Kim rattled off that a lunch with Director Bayek was planned for lunch. Hwang ordered to contact Madame Kang and ask her to prepare new girls because he was supposed to come to her in the evening. Hwang Jong-seob began to climb the stairs where Seo Do-jun had recently stood. Suddenly, the man's eyes widened in fear. The man's sunglasses almost fell off. A certain man was thrown into the wall right before his eyes. Kim In-gu instinctively took a step back. For just a moment, Hwang Jong-seob froze. At the same time, blood gushed out of the victim's mouth. But then, the boss got it too. The guy threw him against the wall, causing him to hit the floor painfully. Seo Do-jun stood over the bodies scattered around the room. Hwang Jong-seob coughed loudly, trying to catch his breath. Frowning, Seo Do-jun sternly told him that Mr. Hwang would have to crawl on all fours from now on. Sweat was pouring down his face. Mr. Hwang was shaking violently from fear, as if he couldn't even stand on his feet. Seo Do-jun sat down on the boss's seat, which was standing nearby. He covered his face with his cap again, looking down for a moment. The boy looked at Hwang Jong-seob, who was kneeling. Seo Do-jun asked if he hadn't heard him. A moment later, Seo Do-jun put his feet up on Mr. Hwang's desk. Mr. Hwang slowly began to crawl. Seo Do-jun ordered Hwan to bark. He said that bastards like him don't deserve to be treated like humans. A second later, the man screamed that he should bark like a dog. Mr. Hwang closed his eyes in shame. But just a moment later, a long human bark reached Seo Do-jun's ears. The man barked even louder, raising his head to Seo Do-jun. Frowning, Hwang made his face even more disgusting. At the same time, the rest of the workers, who did not dare to look at their boss, stood facing the wall. The boy came out from behind the table and sat down on the floor next to Mr. Hwang. He told him to be louder. Jun said that Hwang behaves very submissively and loyally in person, but he reminded that at the same time, the mister is ready to stab you in the back at any opportunity. Leaning over, Jun asked if Hwang thought this was really his first time dealing with a rat like this. Hwang Jong-seob lowered his head, begging for forgiveness and mercy. He insisted that he would be more loyal than a dog. But in response, Seo Do-jun only ordered the man to shut his mouth. He slapped him in the face with all his might. The man then flew back, blood spurting from his nose and mouth. Jun shook his head indifferently. Then, suddenly, Seo Do-jun turned to the bespectacled Kim In-gu, who had been standing to the side all this time. Seo Do-jun breathed a sigh of relief, saying that Kim would be the boss now. He thought it was time to stop serving scum. Jun knew that killing the bosses was not a problem for their business, so he allowed Kim to do it. Swallowing hard, Kim In-gu tensed up. He only pressed his lips together tighter as he looked at the boy in front of him. Bowing, Kim said that his boss had a lot of connections, so if he became the boss, everyone would become suspicious. Smiling awkwardly, Mr. Kim said that Seo Do-jun could spare his boss this once instead. Jun said that it would be better for Kim to throw the boss into a barrel and throw it into the sea or crush him in a landfill, because this is his profession. Seo Do-jun said that if Mr. Kim doesn't want to do that, then he can just throw them all into the A-rank gate. Then Kim and-gu's gaze changed immediately. He opened his eyes wide in horror, not wanting to become food for the monsters. And the man, whose face was completely smeared with blood, immediately raised his frightened gaze to Seo Do-jun. Then Hwang Jung-seo begged for mercy and forgiveness. He bowed, saying that he would forever be his faithful dog. The man nearly cried as he swore eternal loyalty. For a moment, Seo Do-jun froze, his eyes wide. The boy knew that if Hwang was removed, everything would be fine. His gaze immediately changed, and then he exhaled heavily. A moment later, the boy quietly whispered a question under his breath. Jun asked if he had really gone soft. Seo Do-jun said that he would spare Mr. Hwang. He extended his hand to the chief's face. The chief looked up in surprise. Then the man smiled brightly as if he couldn't believe his own luck. His eyes widened. With trembling hands, Mr. Hwang Jung-seob extended his hand to Seo Do-jun. He said that he had been wrong all along. The man kept saying that from now on he would only serve Seo Do-jun. But suddenly he looked down in surprise. The hand that he touched Seo Do-jun with was already burning in a bright flame. The man screamed loudly in pain. The flames were reflected in Jun's eyes. That guy said that this was Mr. Hwang's last chance. Seo Do-jun pulled his hand with the flame away from Hwang Jung-seob. The man immediately recoiled, writhing in agony. A few moments later, the man's arm fell off his body, turning into ordinary soot. It quickly dissipated in the wind. Mr. Hwang continued to shout loudly while looking at the remaining part of his hand, while Seo Do-jun hurriedly left the building. Turning around, Jun said that if any of his family got even a scratch, they would all die. Now they were obliged to guard his relatives around the clock. Officially, Do-jun was considered missing, having disappeared into the rift. But only a few knew that he had not actually disappeared. Now he was sitting with his sister in a restaurant while the police, the Heroes Association, and all the other media kept quiet. Everyone treated Do-jun as if he had died and protected soul from being broken. Do-jun weighed the pros and cons, thinking that if he declared that he was alive, it would only cause problems. Soon, Hwang Chang-sub had to find a new home and his family had to move in peace. Do-jun watched his sister gobble up burgers and was happy. Yoon-young smiled widely and said that she liked the fact that they were moving. Seo Do-jun said that his sister will now be able to go to kindergarten with other children and will go to school next year. After these words, the girl for some reason became a little sad. Do-jun looked at her with confusion and asked if she didn't like kindergarten. The girl said that children tease her because she doesn't have a mom and dad. Do-jun's expression darkened as he tried to come up with a solution. And then he said she didn't have to go there. No need to see those little bastards' faces. The girl was immediately happy that she didn't have to go to kindergarten. Do-jun thought that he should send his sister to a prestigious private school so that no one would look down on her. That same evening, Do-jun made a scene with one of the poor guys he hired. That man offered an old man and a little girl to live in a motel. Apparently, he had no brains at all. Their company ran the motel, so the young man didn't mean any harm. Do-jin asked him to forget about it and then headed to his family. Yoon-young broke free from her grandmother's embrace and attacked Seo Do-jun. Grandma was happy too. She was glad that Do-jun came back alive. Little Yoon-young was almost crying with happiness. She couldn't stop hugging her brother. Do-jun had never experienced such affection from someone before, so he was confused. But the bewilderment quickly gave way to a smile. After all, at least he was doing something right. Yoon-young looked at her brother and asked if he was one of the heroes too. Seo Do-jun asked the girl if she really wanted him to be a hero, to which she replied that she didn't want to. Do-jun didn't understand what she meant, so he asked again what was wrong with the hero's status. Yoon-young replied that heroes fight scary monsters and sometimes die. And Yoon-young and Grandma would like Do-jun to stay alive and be with them forever. Yoon-young's face darkened a little, and she repeated once again that she wanted her brother to be with her always. Seo Do-jun was about to say something. He even took a deep breath, but then suddenly stopped. He bowed his head down and still couldn't find what he should say. He couldn't promise anything to Yoon-young, even in the cruel world of the past. He was a man who survived until the very end. In that past world, he lost a lot during the endless fight with monsters, but now something valuable that he had forgotten has reappeared in his life. In this world, Seo Do-jun was going to live protecting his little happiness. The hubbub in the hero corporations had not died down all this time, and now the helicopter was flying towards the corporation building. That helicopter was heading straight to the headquarters of the Hero Association in Korea. There, on the top floor of the building with panoramic windows, stood a man, saying that they could not find out anything. The man was the founder of the Korean Heroes Association, Na Tai-hwan. His protege responded that they could not determine anything at the moment. Na Taihuan expressed indignation and said that the rift that once disappeared on its own could open again. The girl agreed, saying that the variables were dangerous, and it would be much better if a wave of monsters hit. But her boss immediately pulled her up, telling her to think about what she was saying. The safety of civilians was much more important. Na Taihuan was one of the 100 most respected heroes on the planet. If he decided to become president, he would be elected with the highest percentage. This man had power, but he didn't care about that power. He truly cared only about the safety of the people. Na Taihuan asked his ward to explore everything, even if it took a long time. She also reported that a resident of a house in the fault zone agreed to sell. Na Taihuan asked him to pay the man above the market price. The boss opened his laptop and started looking for something there. Then he looked in surprise at what appeared on the small screen. He looked at the map, where it was clear that the fault had appeared in other countries as well. This was unusual. His protege asked if the US and China had entered a control phase, so why were there faults there? Na Taihuan said that the problem was in England. The reliable heroes were sent to other rifts. A new message immediately appeared on the computer. The boss was astonished as if he had just seen a ghost. He cried out that this couldn't be true. He looked at his screen again and loudly announced that a rift had been discovered in England. At the same time, the one who was declared dead was heading towards the city center. Du-jun walked slowly along the busy street, trying not to attract too much attention to himself. He reached a small shop with a garish red sign and went inside. The new customer notification system began to ring as soon as the young man appeared on the threshold. The seemingly exhausted employee greeted the guy listlessly, and raising his eyes, the boy screamed as if he had seen a ghost instead of Du-jun. The employee turned to the man sitting at the desk. He shouted to the manager that this was the man. The manager calmly slammed the newspaper shut and asked what his employee meant. He then stood up from his seat and asked if Du-jun was the one who forced the employees to sell the magic stones without commission in his absence. Du-jun wasn't at all flustered. He reached into his backpack, saying that he had brought some more stones. The young man threw his backpack on the floor, and the clattering sound of several dozen stones was heard. The manager said that they would not do business with Do-jun and asked him to leave. Hearing this, the young man was perplexed and asked again if the manager was sure of his words, to which the manager began to explain that a 1% commission meant nothing but losses for them. Realizing that these people no longer wanted to work with him, Do-jun said that they would regret it. The head of this establishment scratched his head, not intending to explain why even the gate center takes a commission. Then he turned around, looked at the guest, and coldly ordered him to take the stones and leave immediately. But Do-jun didn't plan on giving up. He kicked his backpack. A moment later, the backpack fell to the floor and a multitude of magic stones spilled out. The face of the employee, who had been so angry before, completely changed, twisting into a strange grimace. The manager, in turn, was also shocked when he saw what was in the guy's bag. No one could believe that there really were the hero's magic stones. Where did this guy get such rare stones? Du-jun looked at the two losers and told them to forget about him if they weren't interested in such stones. The hero's magic stones were indeed a local curiosity. They looked like a red mineral with a blue star. Kurzman, a famous drug dealer in Mexico, bought magical stones for use in drug production. And one day something irreparable happened. He could not expect that the stone in his hands would explode. But it turned out to be just his advantage. The ability of the magic stone manifested itself, and he awoke as a hero. This stone was a powerful source of energy, extremely expensive due to how difficult it was to obtain. Du-jun looked down on the two shocked workers and asked them to put everything in the bag. The manager immediately came to his senses, as he did not want to lose such stones. He asked Do-jun to sit down and wait for a while. The poor worker who had complained so much now humbly wiped the blood off the stones. And Do-jun calmly drank a refreshing drink with ice and listened to the manager's apology. The manager was clearly not happy with the 0.5% commission, as it would have almost meant the end of his business. Du-jun, who had been listening to these nitpicks for the 100th time, repeated that if the manager didn't like something, he would calmly leave. The manager still didn't want to lose such a customer, but asked why Du-jun had lowered the commission to 0.5%, to which he replied that they had made him angry. After such an answer, the manager rushed to ask for forgiveness at full force. Seo Du-jun, tired of listening to apologies, just wanted to know if the manager would adjust the commission for him. The worker wiping the stones was still angry, but he couldn't show it. This customer was too valuable. It didn't take much persuasion. The manager finally agreed to lower the commission. The man immediately began a long monologue about the value of magic stones, but Do-jun interrupted him halfway through. Realizing that the manager wanted to raise the commission, Do-jun was about to leave. The manager was running after him, asking for at least 9% commission. When Do-jun didn't show much favor, the manager asked for an 8% commission. The poor worker stood and watched as some young man forced his boss to reduce the commission again and again. Eventually, the manager lost all hope that he could raise the commission above 0.5%. And when all hope was lost, Do-jun took pity and allowed the commission to be settled at 1%. The manager immediately screamed that the young man was a robber. But no matter how much he wanted to put him in his place, he could do nothing. Seo Do-jun smiled slightly, about to say something else. When he said he had 7 more of these bags, the manager was perplexed, and the employee wiping the stones didn't look much happier either. The manager immediately asked the employee to bring their contract so as not to lose such a client. A few hours later, after counting and wiping the stones, Seo Do-jun received a money transfer from the manager. He looked at the 67 million won figure on the screen and thought that at this rate buying a house was not far off. His main problem was just that the gates were not enough to collect high-level magic stones. If only he could freely pass into the fault zones, life would be easier. As soon as he thought about the break, the ground suddenly shook. The manager standing next to him was frightened. Do-jun continued to look at the phone screen, where a notification was now visible. The message was about a wave in the southern region of England, and Seo Do-jun already had a plan brewing in his head. The young man looked at the notification again, then at the manager, breathing a sigh of relief, and was now sure of what to do next. Jun lowered his head and peered into the distance, his lips pressed together, deep in thought. In front of his face was a warning that a wave had formed in the southern region of England. Then the brunette immediately raised his steely gaze. He looked ahead, as if he had decided something. Then Seo Do-jun suddenly turned around, talking about people without abilities. The man behind him was confused. Jun recalled that before, no matter what country he was in, he would go and stop the fault zone. But now, as he walked past the crowd, he decided that he would no longer live by these principles. After some time, fresh meat was being fried before his eyes and carefully turned over. Lee Yun-young stared at the juicy pieces of meat in front of her, mesmerized. Next to her sat a puzzled granny. The waiter began to tell them about the dish, and the girl listened attentively, her mouth wide open. With her head down, the grandmother asked Jun if 250,000 won for 100 grams was really not too expensive. The brunette, drinking water, said that this time he had earned a lot of money, so they could eat as much as they wanted. Then the girl just blew lightly on the hot piece of meat. She opened her mouth wide, preparing to taste the dish. Then Lee Yun-young smiled widely, finally trying the new food. The girl's brown eyes sparkled brightly. It seemed as if even her childish cheeks had a slight blush. Then the girl closed her eyes, enjoying the taste of fresh meat. She opened her mouth wide as if glowing with happiness. Grandma was still looking very cautiously at the pieces of meat that were being fried on the stove in front of her. She barely frowned. Then Seo Do-jun opened his eyes wide, looking somewhere. For a moment he lowered his yellow eyes. He asked the waiter to bring them 4 porridge ribs, prime beef tenderloin, chuck tail, and bird's nest. Grandma asked if the brunette had ordered too much. She doubted whether they would be able to eat it all. In response, Jun smiled brightly, saying that today they should eat until they were full. Therefore, Granny should eat a lot, too. Then the old lady shook her head, sighing heavily. Lee Yun-young handed her a fork with meat already on it. The girl said that this meat was very tasty, so she should try it quickly. Then Yun-young smiled brightly. Granny decided to listen to her granddaughter's advice, so she slowly began to eat the dishes on the table. Grandma liked the taste, too. She was pleasantly surprised and therefore smiled broadly, looking at Seo Do-jun. The old lady then laughed, exchanging glances with her youngest granddaughter. Lee Yun-young also laughed in response. But suddenly, a blurry image of a girl with purple hair appeared behind them. She was heading towards them. Suddenly, Hyun Ju-yeon stopped a few meters away from the table. The rest of the people in the cafe turned around. The girl called Mr. Seo Do-jun. He turned around with displeasure, trying to quickly finish the hot meat. Ju-yeon came closer and then asked the brunette if they could talk. The guy froze for a moment. Ju-yeon addressed him as a hero, but he cut her off. Jun asked if she couldn't see that he was spending time with his family. Frowning, the guy said that if Ju-yeon had any business with him, then they should come after they had lunch. For a moment, the girl froze. She was even confused, not understanding at all how to react to this rudeness. Smiling, the girl was puzzled by his behavior. She knew that she was respected in society, and therefore did not expect this. Moving a little further from the table, the girl suddenly wondered what kind of person was in front of her. She lowered her head for a moment, and then the girl decided to go to the waiting area, which was located nearby. Ju-yeon sat down on the chair with displeasure, trying to avoid all the glances that were directed at her. A group of men looked at the beauty with surprise and admiration, clearly embarrassed by her presence. The group of girls also looked at the lonely heroine with genuine interest. They were all surprised by her. People began to whisper that next to them was a real-world star, an S-rank heroine. She rolled her eyes tiredly. The man did not understand what kind of person could make Hyun Ju-yeon wait. The girl ignored these questions. Ju-yeon frowned as she thought about Seo Do-jun. He was the hero who entered the gate a few months ago and survived. She reasoned that Jun must have awakened there, but then he became a suspect and was declared dead in the rift. But watching him, the girl understood that now Seo Do-jun was alive and sitting in a cafe with his family. Ju-yeon remembered the guy's face. He really made her tense up with just one word and a look. Jun knew that it took at least 5 years to reach S rank, so Jun definitely had a special ability. And then, just a few moments later, the door to the cafe swung open again with a loud bang. Seeing that the family had finished eating, Ju-yeon hurried over to Seo Do-jun, who was walking behind his sister. Seeing a certain man in front of her, the granny froze in place, very scared. Yoon-young followed her example. The man tensed up. He frowned, looking at the man's silhouette. Jun's eyes lit up with a bright light. The yellow-haired boy was surprised by Seo Do-jun's presence and asked how he was able to crawl out of the gate. Kang Cheol-woo said that he would now consider Jun not just an insect but a real, tenacious cockroach. The girl wasn't very happy about Kang Cheol-woo's presence either. She didn't understand how he could be here. Kang Cheol-woo walked closer to his old acquaintance, smiling nastily. Seo Do-jun remained calm. The boy then walked past Kang Cheol-woo as if he was simply ignoring him. He looked down for a moment. Seo Do-jun turned to the girl, asking if she had asked to talk to him. Ju-yeon was immediately surprised. Then the girl came closer, and Kang Cheol-woo was surprised that the girl was also in this cafe. Jun said he would listen to the girl if she took care of his family. Hyun Ju-yeon asked what he meant. He pointed to the grandmother and her granddaughter, saying that they should just take a taxi home. The old woman hid Yoon-young behind her back. The girl's eyes widened in surprise when the guy said that he would have to stay late. The boy's eyes sparkled brightly with undisguised anger. Seo Do-jun said that he had a debt to pay back. Kang Cheol-woo was already smiling like he was crazy. He had already raised his sword, preparing to fight the guy in front of him. The cafe sign was brightly lit. It was already late at night, but because of the streetlights, the roads were well lit. Hyun Ju-yeon walked Lee Yoon and her grandmother to the taxi, telling them not to worry. Lee Yoon-young looked at the heroine in surprise. The heroine waved goodbye, calling the girls a sweet young lady. The girl smiled brightly, trying to dispel the tense atmosphere. A few moments later, the car finally drove away. When Jun's family had gone far enough, the girl allowed herself to relax. Then she sighed heavily. But a nightmare was already happening in the cafe. A certain man knocked over several chairs with one blow. It was Seo Do-jun. The customers immediately crowded behind him, watching the fight in surprise. Kang Cheol-woo, who had just received a strong slap, froze for a moment. A red mark was visible on his cheek. But a moment later, the boy's eyes flashed bright red. Cheol-woo said that now Seo Do-jun was finished. But they were interrupted by a waitress who awkwardly apologized. She wanted to say that fighting was prohibited there. But Kang Cheol-woo didn't want to listen to the girl. With one jerk, he pushed her away, telling her that she'd better get lost. Then the girl screamed. Some customers decided to help the waitress, while others hurried to leave the building. Kang Cheol-woo cried out loudly, asking if Seo Do-jun really wanted to die. The man wanted to curse again, but Seo Do-jun stopped him. He struck his opponent again. Jun's eyes seemed to light up for a moment. He punched Chul with all his might, knocking him to the floor. Kang Cheol-woo clenched his teeth tighter and swung. His veins were covered in writing, and the capillaries in his eyes began to turn red. Sitting down on the floor, the boy with yellow hair froze for a moment. He barely touched his face before he sighed heavily. Seo Do-jun, who towered over his opponent, suddenly turned to Kang Cheol-woo. Jun reminded him that Kang Chul had brought him to the gate and locked him there, condemning him to death. In response, the man lowered his gaze. The boy coughed up blood. Seo Do-jun asked him if Chul agreed that they should talk. Chul chuckled, saying that he had nothing to talk about with someone who even his father had abandoned. He insisted that Jun's stepmother had ordered him to be killed. But then suddenly Jun touched the screen of his own phone. He unlocked it. And then Seo Do-jun asked Kang Cheol-woo to say it again. The guy turned on the audio recording. The man, who had been kneeling this whole time, suddenly looked up at Jun. Then Kang Cheol-woo chuckled evilly, saying that Jun was talking complete nonsense. The man asked what he should say again. Chaw's hand burst into flames. The man said again that Seo Do-jun's mother was just a dirty whore. He raised his arm, preparing to strike. The guy said that Seo Do-jun should die here and now, but he stood motionless. Then the boy's pupils widened greatly. Seo Do-jun immediately rushed from the spot. Kang Seol-woo was about to attack the enemy with fire, but Seo Do-jun easily blocked his attack. And then, just a moment later, Cheol-woo was almost thrown into the wall again. Seo Do-jun's airflow was strong. Kang Cheol-woo was surprised, not understanding how it was possible that his fist simply bounced off. But Seo Do-jun wasn't going to stop there. He extended his hand forward, gathering the power of the wind element. Then, Chol's body was thrown to the floor. He screamed loudly, trying to resist the flow of Jun's power. A moment later, Seo Do-jun rushed towards Cheol, who could barely remain conscious. The flow of the hero's power continued to spread throughout the entire establishment for a few more seconds. The waitress, almost in tears, said that she would call the police again. They had not answered her before. But suddenly a man snatched the girl's phone from her hands. The waitress immediately became frightened and recoiled. It was Ju Yeon who said that the waitress didn't have to worry. She kept saying that she would take care of everything. The girl thanked Ju Yeon with tears in her eyes, freezing for a second. She decided to listen to her. At the same time, behind them, Seo Do-jun leaned closer to Kang Chul, delivering new blows. Watching the fight, Ju Yeon couldn't understand how a B-rank hero could be so helpless next to Jun. Ju Yeon knew that even with A rank, Seo Do-jun wouldn't be able to deal with Kang Cheol-woo so easily. And then, as she approached the two boys, the girl suddenly turned to Seo Do-jun. After a few seconds of silence, the girl said that if Jun continued, Chul would die. For a second, Seo Do-jun froze, frowning deeply. He turned away from the girl's face. But then the man suddenly stood up. Ju Yeon instinctively took a step back. The girl was slightly frightened by the guy's mood. After a moment, she asked how much Jun knew about Kang Chul. In response, the guy said boredly that he knew almost everything he needed. He just didn't understand why she needed this information. The girl sighed heavily, saying that there was something important. Ju Yeon closed her eyes for a moment. The girl said that Kang Chul is the cousin of the S-rank hero whose name is Kang Yun-pyo. But the guy just said, puzzled, that he knew about it. He asked if it was a problem. Ju Yeon realized that the guy didn't think about the consequences at all, and therefore considered him too reckless. The girl said that the selfish Kang Cheol-woo did reckless things because of Kang Yun-pyo's patronage. Ju Yeon said she didn't know about the feud between them, but Jun is wrong if he thinks Kang Yun won't intervene. Ju Yeon noticed the boy's smile. She widened her eyes and asked if Seo Do-jun wasn't afraid of the hero. But the guy only got closer to her. Jun said that he was now more worried about the girl's wide knowledge of him. The guy was clearly angry as he looked at the girl. He frowned even more and pressed his lips into a thin line. The girl looked like she was prepared for such a question from him. She only narrowed her eyes for a moment. The waitress hid behind the table. She wanted to remind Ju Yeon that she had promised to take care of everything. Do-jun stood face to face with the strange woman who came for him. For the first time in a long time, doubt and fear were reflected in the young man's eyes. And the girl looked at him with complete confidence, thinking about what she should say. She then apologized for the sudden meeting and said that her uncle had asked for something. She started talking about Do-jun selling magic stones to a store in Gasan and asked him to sell them to her. Without thinking, So Do-jun coldly asked how many stones she wanted. The girl waved her hand and said that she would buy everything he had. Do-jun tried to calculate in his mind how much money he would receive, and then warned the girl that he had quite a few of these stones. The stranger frowned and said that Do-jun didn't even know how much money a top-ranking hero had. The poor guy was still lying on the floor and eavesdropping on the conversation. Seo Do-jun put forward his condition. He continued talking about the condition and casually mentioned that Hyun Ju Yeon would easily fulfill it. At the same time, somewhere on the other side of Seoul, someone was smashing glasses. It was that same stepmother of Do-jun's who wanted him dead the most. According to this enraged woman, Do-jun should have died when entering the new rift. Her bodyguard apologized and said that even the Hero Association thought he was dead. But the woman didn't need an excuse. She asked about the further plan to kill Do-jun. But there was one more thing the bodyguard had to say. Kang Cheol-woo was beaten by Do-jun. The woman couldn't understand why Kang Cheol-woo. And then one thought struck her. Do-jun knew something. Sweat appeared on the woman's face. She couldn't let her grandfather or father find out about her plan. She could cover it up somehow, but if the media finds out, the company's shares will fall. The woman's voice was agitated. She ordered her bodyguard to control the media and silence the police. To this, the bodyguard only responded in bewilderment that they had already shut up everyone they needed to. Dejun's stepmother praised Manager Yi and plopped down into the office chair. The manager reminded her that what they had done was not a one-size-fits-all solution to the problem. Therefore, the manager felt it necessary to tell the woman that Kang Chul-woo's cousin was Kang Yun-pyo. She immediately came to her senses and asked again if this was her friend Kang Yun-pei. In fact, Kang Cheol-woo had a reputation as a scumbag even among hero circles. It was believed in society that his brother, Kang Yun-pyo, adored his brother, Kang Cheol-woo. But in reality, Kang Cheol-woo was just the one who did all the dirty work for his brother. If Kang Cheol-woo were to be manipulated by the police and the media, it would be a problem for Kang Yun-pyo. Fearing that these brothers had already begun their actions, Do-jun's stepmother requested a meeting with them as soon as possible. The woman also wanted to know more about President Hwang Chang-seop's betrayal, but the manager only said that he was taking care of Do-jun's family. Hearing this, the stepmother seemed to lose her temper and ordered them to contact Prosecutor Pak so that he would pay. By this time, Seo Do-jun had been brought to the gate. There were only 37 rift zones in South Korea. Among the rift zones were 5 zones that are currently being converted into gates. In the rest, only heroes connected to the association could hunt, and now Ju-yeon led Do-jun to one of the gates. In fact, Do-jun wasn't particularly thrilled with this arrangement. There was only one entrance, but it was controlled, and now 4 more people entered before him. O-rank hero Jung In-ju approached Ju-yeon, saying that her proposal was unusual. Ju-yeon replied that she didn't see the point in going into boring, low-ranking rifts. The girl turned around and looked at the end of her group. There, at the very end, trailing behind everyone else, was Seo Do-jun, a man whose abilities were too outstanding. The girl remembered a recent dialogue with him. His condition was to help him get to the rift zone. The girl thought that if Do-jun came to the danger zone to earn more money, then he was clearly out of his mind. Even without taking her uncle's request into account, she needed the hero's magic stones anyway, so she didn't object. After walking down a long corridor, the girl finally led her group into the light. Ju-yeon's friend still wouldn't stop asking about the guy who was trailing behind the group. Ju-yeon continued to reply that he was just an acquaintance, but her friend had already listed Do-jun as one of the girl's potential boyfriends. Hearing something about a potential partner, Ju-yeon began to deny it, saying that she was simply fulfilling his request. Ju-yeon's friend thought that she owed someone a lot of money. Their dialogue was interrupted by sharp vibrations that forced them to turn around. Oh-jun looked up, trying to figure out what was attacking them. All the heroes took up fighting stances and froze with shocked expressions on their faces. Something that resembled an eagle was flying straight towards them. The creature looked quite menacing. A girl from the group screamed that it was Castrian. Apparently, everyone here was afraid of him. Ju-yeon immediately began giving orders, forcing Jin-ju to defend and Seon-ho to attack the legs. But in an instant, Do-jun rushed past the group members and rushed to attack. Ju-yeon screamed, trying to dissuade Do-jun from his strange decision to fight. Everyone present froze in shock because for them, fighting such a monster was tantamount to suicide. Ju-yeon's friend also looked at Do-jun with confusion and fear. But none of this mattered to the young man. He had come here for stones, not for sympathy. Seo Do-jun then gathered his fire energy into a fist and prepared to strike at the monster. The monster was no longer happy that he had come out to hunt. There was fear in the monster's eyes. A fiery blow with enormous power hit the monster's head. After delivering the blow, Do-jun decided to touch the ground with his feet and jumped down, shaking off the dust. Ju-yeon looked at this young man in complete shock, clutching her sword in her hand. Do-jun came closer to the place where the monster's body fell. The poor creature's cheek now bore a huge dent from a fist. None of Ju-yeon's group could believe that this young man had killed the monster with one blow. But in reality, he needed to make sure that the monster was dead, so Do-jun decided to finish it off. He kicked the monster's other cheek sharply, saying that this is how he would die. A deathly silence fell over Ju-yeon's group. Everyone looked at this young man as if he was crazy. Ju-yeon's friend turned around and asked in fear what kind of person he was. Ju-yeon didn't want to think about it, so she answered with the same fear that he must just be strong. Ju-yeon's friend started shaking her, saying that she was not satisfied with this answer. Ju-yeon adjusted her glasses and replied that if it was a simple murder, then Unni was capable of it too. Jong In-ju continued to sing Do-jun's praises for killing that monster in mid-air with one blow. Ju-yeon became more and more confused about what was happening around her. Looking at Do-jun, she wondered who this person was. Not finding an answer, the girl turned to In-ju and said that they were changing the plan. Ju-yeon was going to go check out the central area. While Do-jun was trying to get the magic stone out of the monster, someone approached him. Du Jun, anticipating what would be asked of him, said that he did not want to share the catch with someone who did nothing. But it turned out that Ju Yan had no intention of asking for a share. The girl correctly noted that his skills did not match this place, and asked if he planned to go deeper. Seo Dojun smiled as if he had been waiting for her to ask, and then, picking up his weapon, he said that it would be interesting. Ju Yeon said that she knows the geography of this area, so she can guide him. A few seconds later, she rushed forward at a tremendous speed, leaving Do Jun behind. Do Jun remained standing in place as if rooted to the spot, gathering himself after the girl. He got into a running stance to gain speed, and a few moments later, he was gone too. The group of 5 remained standing in bewilderment. They said something about how if Ju Yan was a bullet, then this guy must be a fast beam of light. One of the group members asked Inju if they would follow the masters. It was clear that no one present could match Ju Yan or Do Jun in skill. They decided to wander around the area and try to find more prey. Yingja looked at the dead monster and thought that A-rank heroes couldn't compare to S-rank heroes. Then Inju remembered the man Ju Yan had brought. He was much stronger than all of them. The realization that Do Jun was stronger than Ju Yan caused the girl to panic a little. At the same time, Ju Yan was running through the forest as fast as she could. She turned around to see if Do Jun was keeping up with her and was surprised. There was no one behind her. The girl seriously considered slowing down, but from somewhere off to the side, a familiar voice was heard asking if Ju Yan could run faster. She certainly didn't expect to be overtaken, so she stumbled in surprise. Do Jun pulled ahead. Ju Yan couldn't believe she had just been overtaken. She was the number 2 fastest woman in Korea. Do Jun decided he had enough of this stupid racing and stopped. The guy said that Ju Yan was slower than he expected, although the girl ran as if she had made it her goal not to let herself be caught. Ju Yeon realized that she had just been caught and began to deny it while Do Jun sensed the enemy approaching. From the place where they stood, there was a magnificent view of the mountain range in the center of the fault. Ju Yeon didn't understand where Do Jun was looking, so she asked him directly. As soon as she looked in the same direction as he did, the girl understood. This was the place where the Rift Zone boss lived. Do Jun didn't seem to know about it yet. Ju Yeon decided to fill Do Jun in on the situation and told him about the Khazarian, a monster that resembles a pterodactyl. She immediately warned the young man not to think about challenging him, as at least 3 S ranks were needed to kill him. Do Jun asked if it contained a magical stone of a transcendental level. After hearing a positive answer from Ju Yeon, he weighed the pros and cons again. The girl immediately came to her senses, realizing that this guy was going to challenge that monster. But while she was saying that she didn't bring him here to do stupid things, Do Jun had already run away. Ju Yeon froze in place with a stunned expression on her face, not understanding what that lunatic was planning. The girl rushed in pursuit of Do Jun, shouting for him to stop this very second. After a few minutes, she finally almost caught up with him, but Do Jun was still running ahead. The 2 masters moved incredibly fast. At some point, they found themselves right under the mountain. It was getting dark and cold, but the journey was not over yet. The girl's eyes widened and she froze in surprise. It seemed as if her pupils were sparkling brightly. Looking ahead in fear, Hyun Ju-yeon still couldn't comprehend what had happened. In front of her lay the corpse of a huge monster. Gripping her sword tighter, the girl took a few steps forward. Then Ju-yeon turned her gaze to Seo Do-jun, who pulled out a broken sword from his backpack. The girl always knew that Khazarian had incredible strength. She frowned looking at the guy. Hyun remembered Park Ha-yeol. He was a famous S-rank assassin of Khazarian. But Ju-yeon remembered that even he went to Khazarian for the first time together with 30 S-rank heroes. But in that battle, everyone died. Then the monster destroyed every high-ranking hero. Only Park Ha-yeol managed to survive. He was seriously wounded, but after that he went back to the battlefield. The man wanted revenge, and so the next time he took with him 1 S-rank hero and another 200 A-rank ones. Many experienced warriors tried to defeat this monster, sacrificing their lives. And then, using green chains, the heroes began to tame the creature. They put them on the monster's beak. But Khazarian only became more angry about this, and then he rebelled, flames coming out of his mouth. But the heroes acted decisively, knowing that they would not have a second chance. Screaming, they pounced on the monster. Khazarian once again attempted to devour his enemies, breaking the chains on his muzzle. More than 200 people attacked the monster at once. They attacked it from afar and from close range. That time, the heroes finally managed to defeat Khazarian. Many were injured and died during the massacre. Even despite the great losses, the heroes still rejoiced at their victory over the monster. Mega. Park Ha-yeol's guild suffered such losses that even after 3 years, it cannot recover. Therefore, seeing such an easy victory over the monster, the girl could not take her eyes off Seo Do-jun. But suddenly the guy turned around and asked if Ju-yeon realized that she hadn't made any contribution. But Ju-yeon ignored him, thinking that if she hadn't seen it with her own eyes, she would never have believed it. She thought again of the giant Kasserian, who had a sad reputation. The thought that such a monster could fall from one blow from a man was truly terrifying. Seo Do-jun didn't care about these thoughts. He just decided to pull out the magic stone from the monster's body. The man began to examine the unusually shaped crystal. It seemed to be wrapped in the remains of the monster's armor. The boy sighed and told Ju-yeon that he no longer needed directions. He put the stone in his backpack. Then Seo Do-jun turned around, saying that he would go alone now. The girl still didn't move. Ju-yeon asked if Jun would take the monster's artifacts. It turned out that Kasserian still had many valuable materials, but the guy didn't even pay attention to it. He decided to just linger for a second. He turned around and smiled. Seo Do-jun said that these artifacts weren't worth money. Ju-yeon was stunned by this answer. Jun continued, saying that he would be better off taking the stones of other monsters. Waving his hand, Jun said that Ju-yeon could take Kasserian's artifacts as payment for the indicated road. The girl then turned her awkward gaze to the corpse of the monster that lay nearby. Then Hyun Ju-yeon said indifferently that she didn't need these artifacts either. Sometime later, closer to sunset, a small group of people stood in the forest. They had a lot of things, because there were black backpacks lying around everywhere, filled to the brim. The two girls looked at the backpacks in surprise, not knowing what to say. The man standing next to them was also dumbfounded. The guy said that Jun came with a huge backpack that was filled with magic stones. They insisted that to get that many stones, the entire guild would need to hunt for at least 3 days. The heroes really couldn't believe it. Ju-yeon walked away from them, sitting down on the ground nearby. Hyun Ju-yeon listened attentively to their conversations, watching them from afar. One of the heroines understood that it was not only about the quantity and quality of the stones. She also did not believe that Jun defeated Kasserian alone. The girl knew that this achievement alone would make Seo Do-jun the strongest hero in Korea. Looking at the stones again, the heroine decided that it was more likely the status of the strongest hero in the world. But, suddenly turning around, the girl noticed Seo Do-jun, who had come to them again with a full backpack. When the guy put the backpack on the ground, the other heroes first froze in place and then began to whisper. They insisted that people around them would not believe them if they were told about it. Others would simply think they were crazy. One of the guys said that they couldn't tell anyone about what happened, because no one would even believe it. But then, abruptly standing up from her seat, Hyun Ju-yeon walked forward, the setting sun only slightly illuminating her. The girl approached Seo Do-jun and then began to speak discontentedly about something. The rest of the group listened. Someone said that they were probably flirting with each other. The heroine replied that she should have noticed this long ago. They whispered that Jun looked like Ju-yeon's equal and that they looked good together. Others said that they looked like a couple at first glance. But suddenly, Ju-yeon's friend cleared her throat, realizing that it was strange to call this flirting. After taking a closer look, she decided that Seo-jun was being careless towards Ju-yeon, and she shouldn't be spoken to in that tone. But her thoughts stopped when Seo Do-jun simply handed the backpack with stones into Ju-yeon's hands. Surprised, Hyun Ju-yeon remained where she was, but Seo Do-jun quickly turned around and left. The group froze for a moment. The girl ran up to her friend and asked if Hyun Ju-yeon had just left without saying goodbye. Then, the heroine asked what they should do with these backpacks. Since Jun simply decided to leave them, Ju-yeon decided to tell them about the conversation with Jun. She warned him that if the murder of Kasserian became known, he would gain fame. But then Seo Do-jun replied that he didn't need fame, so he asked to leave the stones with Hyun Ju-yeon. The heroine sighed in surprise and asked with displeasure what kind of person this was. Hyun Ju-yeon turned away. The girl's gaze seemed to dim. It was as if she was focused only on her thoughts. Then the girl couldn't hide her embarrassment. Awkwardly looking away, she also wondered what kind of person Jun was. The bright sun illuminated the tall buildings of Seoul. It was already late in the day, and the streets were bustling with life. The building with a dark roof was illuminated by bright rays of sunlight. Next to it stood another small extension. A certain man in that building was trying his best to punch a punching bag. He wasn't feeling sorry for himself at all. The blue-haired man was practicing his punches endlessly, his eyes shining brightly with anger. And then, at some point, because of his blow, the punching bag simply burst into several pieces. Park Hae-yeol frowned deeply as he stared at the torn red fabric. Puck cursed and said that he was in terrible shape. He was an S-rank hero who belonged to the Hero Association. An assistant approached him and assured him that the frog, which crawls slowly, can jump far. The man said that the more Park can find resilience in difficult times, the more his reputation will grow. Park Hae-yeol said that this way he could strike back at the bastards who looked down on him. The assistant exclaimed that when the time came, everyone would fall prostrate before the guildmaster. He chuckled. The guy said that if it came to how to defeat Kazarian, then there would be no equal to Park Hae-yeol. The assistant said that Pa would go down in history as the hero who defeated Kazarian with the least number of men. He insisted that the Hero Association would most likely even award Puck exclusive rights. Then the man laughed, finally coming to his senses. He said that he really knew more about Kazarian than anyone else. Park Hae-yeol said that the guild has shrunk significantly compared to how many there were 3 years ago. The chief said that until now he remains the only one who can definitely kill this bird. The assistant, smiling nastily, said that no one except the master was capable of such a thing. Then a loud laugh was heard from their building, and after a while the sun began to shine less over the house. A certain person was holding Seo Do-jun's photo tightly in his hands, and next to it was written all the information about him. Kang Yoon-pyo, Kang Cheol-woo's cousin, said Seo Do-jun's name and asked if he was the one who did this. The assistant leaned over, saying that a few months ago, Kang Cheol-woo tried to kill him by throwing him through the gate. Kang Yoon-pyo said that Seo Do-jun not only survived there, but was also able to awaken. The assistant said that Hong Hee-ju was the client. Kang asked why the chaebol would run after the boy. He replied that Seo Do-jun was the illegitimate son of the T-group president who was thrown out of the house. Kang Yoon-pyo then chuckled and said that it seemed like the chaebol family didn't value their offspring very much. Getting up from the sofa, the man asked how much Cheol-woo was paid for the work he had done. The assistant replied that the final price was 3 billion. Kang Yoon-pyo was surprised. Picking up a golf club, Khan asked if the idiot had really screwed up after all. The assistant said he heard that Cheol-woo's entire body was covered in burns. He was completely blind and was almost dying. Kang Yoon-pyo then sarcastically responded to the man that Seo Do-jun was so cruel. The man then decided to play indoor golf, hitting the ball into the far hole. Licking his lips, Kang Yoon-pyo thought that if he were Seo Do-jun, he would have torn out Chul's limbs and crushed his skull. And then the man tried to put the ball in the hole again. The assistant wanted to add details to the story. The man said that there were rumors that Hyun Ju-yeon helped Seo Do-jun. Kang Yoon-pyo's hand twitched, and then the ball rolled past its target. The man clearly did not expect such information. Throwing down the club, Kang asked why Ju-yeon was helping Jun and what kind of relationship they had. The assistant replied that he could not judge this, but thanks to Ju's testimony, the case was hushed up. And then Khan pulled the assistant by the collar, shouting that he had to find out what kind of relationship there was between them. Khan said that if there was no relationship, then there was an agreement. He rushed to the door, saying that he would find out everything. Looking down, Kang Yoon-pyo frowned deeply, trying to contain his anger. He clenched his teeth tighter. The man then broke the golf club with one easy movement. The veins in his hand bulged out. And then, with an exasperated sigh, Kang Yoon-pyo threw the stick away, breaking it in two. Kang Yoon-pyo thought that Hong Hee-ju would soon come to him to hire him to do what Cheol-woo couldn't do. Then the man let out an irritated breath, saying that in principle he could wait. The man licked his lips and thought that since she was a chaebol, she must have a lot of money. After some time it was already deep night. Only lanterns and the moon illuminated the way for the residents of Seoul. At the same time, Seo Do-jun was slowly walking home after hunting, his hands in his pockets. The boy opened his eyes and shook his head. He thought that hunting in the rift was indeed much more effective than in the gate. Jun decided that he would need Hyun Ju-yeon to get past the security. He remembered her words. Ju said that if So sold the stones, the media would pester Jun all the time. So she offered to keep them for herself. The girl said that if Seo Do-jun's goal is fame, she won't stop him. She asked the guy for his decision. But instead of answering, the man simply decided to give her the entire backpack with magic stones. She was surprised. The guy grinned and realized that he would have to find another way to get into the fault zones. But first, the guy still wanted to relax in the new house prepared by Hwang Chang-sub. Speeding up, after just a few minutes, Seo Do-jun was finally able to find himself in his new home. But as he looked down, the man immediately tensed up. Jun frowned deeply, and his eyes flashed angrily. Suddenly, the man noticed too many pairs of extra shoes. They were men's office shoes. As soon as Seo Do-jun entered the house, he heard the loud cry of Lee Yoon-young. She loudly called out for her brother. Woon-young sat next to her grandmother on the sofa. There were many men in suits crowded around them. Only one guy stood out. It was a blond man who was dressed in very simple clothes. He looked up at Seo Do-jun with tired eyes. The girl threw herself into her brother's arms. Jun ignored her, asking who these people were. The blond man said he was Prosecutor Park Chul-young. He asked if Jun knew Hwang Jong-seop. Lee Yun-young hid behind her brother. Seo Do-ya-jun tensed up, his eyes wide in surprise. The prosecutor said Jun was arrested for assisting Hwang Jong-seop in illegal loan sharking operations with high interest rates. The weather outside was fine, but the people inside the prosecutor's office building did not see it. Seo Do-jun sat chained to a wooden chair in the interrogation room. The young man kept looking around, waiting for the investigator to come in. Footsteps and words were heard from the corridor that Hwang Jong-seop and Seo Do-jun were assisting the investigation. The investigator thanked someone on the phone because his daughter was currently studying abroad. He asked the person on the line to convey his gratitude to Director Hong. The investigator looked at the man in the interrogation room and continued talking on the phone. He said he took this position only to remove this garbage from the streets. Someone angrily and sharply threw a stack of forms on the table. It was that same investigator. Now he sat in front of Do-jun and promised to lock him up behind bars for 10 years. Holding one of the forms up in front of Do-jun's face, he informed him that Hwang Jong-seop had already reported him. The young man, of course, was not pleased. His gaze darkened. Having heard no response from the accused, the investigator lost his temper and started shouting. But suddenly, Do-jun's calm voice was heard asking if Hong Hee-ju was involved in all of this. The investigator, who seemed stunned for a moment, came to his senses and asked who they were talking about. Judging by the mood, Han Jong-soob's gang was completely dismantled. But Do-jun didn't make any trouble and agreed to pass peacefully and without fuss. The investigator didn't understand this, just as he couldn't understand where Do-jun got such self-importance from. Then the investigator's face twisted, and he asked if Do-jun thought the Korean prosecutor's office was a joke. The man promised that the boy would be finished, but Do-jun only looked at him with a murderous gaze. His look alone scared the investigator to death. The man stepped back a couple of meters with an expression of true fear on his face. After some time, the investigator clenched his teeth and hissed as if he was angry. And then he completely lost his temper, raising his hand to slap Do-jun. But the slap didn't work. Someone interrupted their dialogue by entering the interrogation room. It was a man in a suit who urgently needed the opinion of Prosecutor Pak. The prosecutor stepped away from his work for a few minutes, and then a cry was heard in the corridor. Prosecutor Pak held some documents in his hands and could not figure out what had happened. The documents stated that the hero-level scanner had recognized Do-jun as an ordinary person. This was beyond the prosecutor's understanding. His assistant himself could not believe it, but assumed that the information about his awakening was false. But the prosecutor knew for sure that the information the corporation gave him could not be false. At the same time, the unsuspecting Do-jun was still sitting in the interrogation room and thinking about something. He was angry about the nepotism and bribery in the prosecutor's office, and now he understood why prosecutors were called mongrels. The only thing he wanted now was to take Grandma and Yoon-young and go far away. Suddenly, Ju-yeon entered the interrogation room. She asked him right from the doorway what he was doing there. And only then did it dawn on her that the person sitting in front of her was Seo Do-jun. The girl looked surprised. Do-jun, gloomy as a cloud, replied that he had no idea why he was here. The girl asked him not to make stupid decisions, as using force would only make things worse. Do-jun asked if she was trying to help him. The girl did not give any clear answer. She diverted the topic by saying that she knew he had done nothing wrong, and that she was sorry that an innocent man was being tried. Seo Do-jun was happy to see such kindness from Ju-yeon. It could work to his advantage. The girl said that the Hero Association would conduct its own investigation, which would take into account the actions of the unlicensed hero in the recent rift in Mapo. But none of this interested Seo Do-jun. He immediately asked the question that interested him about what happened to his family. Ju-yeon was not happy with this question, and asked why she would want to spy on his family. But since she was here, she had some information. Do-jun understood that. Ju-yeon's expression showed that she was definitely avoiding the topic and didn't want to talk about it. The girl turned around and was about to leave, throwing out a last remark that his family was safe. Do-jun smiled and promised to definitely repay this debt. He didn't smile often, which meant that he was truly happy now. Ju-yeon asked him to hold on a little longer until she sorted this matter out. Hyun Ju-yeon decided that there was no need to prove Do-jun's innocence through standard channels. She chose to expose Park Chul-young's bribery in exchange for him handing down illegal sentences, which led to his dismissal. However, he did not escape the charge of heroic work without a license, but he got off with a suspended sentence due to Ju-yeon's defense. The radio in the car was blaring about some kind of unseen monster from Britain that was now attacking civilians. Dujun said that the monster was Macassian. Ju-Yan was shocked by such accuracy. The girl behind the wheel turned to Do-Jun, asking how he knew about this creature. It was completely new. But this young man knew much more than the organization. The names of the monsters were not invented as one wished. The mana stones contained not only energy, but also information. Its analysis revealed the name of the monsters along with other data. The modern Earth analyzed everything with the help of science, but in the fallen world this was achieved with magic. So as long as the same monsters appear in this world as in the fallen world, Dujun will already know most of them by name, classification, and skills. Xiao Dojun didn't dare to explain all this to Ju-Yan. He only gave advice on how to deal with the monster. Then he began to talk about the properties of the red ant's poison and how deadly this poison is to monsters. Ju-Yan was silent for a moment, as if she couldn't find what to say. And then she abruptly asked who Dujun really was. The young man does not want to answer this question. He could not reveal his identity now. The car was racing along the highway. There were two people sitting in the car. One was deep in thought, and the other was completely confused. Time dragged on for an unusually long time, and Ju-Yan was still waiting for some kind of answer. But there was no answer. This made her ask the young man again if he was listening to her. Suddenly Do-Jun abruptly changed the topic of conversation and coldly asked what would happen if he killed Hong Hee-ju. At that moment his eyes began to glow with anger again. His intentions seemed quite real. Meanwhile, somewhere on the other side of Seoul, Hong Hee-ju sat and bit her nails. The woman looked as if she had just seen a ghost. Her loyal manager, I stood before her with another report. This has already become a tradition in recent days. Hearing the new report, the woman sank into even more fear. Nothing was changing for the better. She couldn't understand why Hyun Ju-yeon was covering for Do-Jun like that. The manager was quick to say that it was not yet clear what kind of relationship he had with Do-Jun and how they met. Hee-ju had no idea what was happening or how she had gotten to this point. All she could do was live in fear. And she couldn't believe that Do-Jun wasn't a hero. Everyone was so sure that he had awakened. The manager suggested that Do-Jun had some ability to fool the scanner. This answer certainly did not satisfy the poor, already angry and frightened woman. She jumped up from her seat and shouted for the manager to contact Kang Yu-pei and offer him 30 billion won. But this Kang Yu-pei turned out to be quite a character. He didn't consider 30 billion to be a lot of money and refused. The second manager intervened in the conversation, asking if this was too much. In Hong Hee-ju's opinion, this big shot was the only way out, so he knew his worth. And Hyun Ju-yeon decided to step in. By accepting the offer, Kang Yu-pyo had to face another S rank. His bodyguard said that Han Ju-yeon is definitely a dangerous opponent. In response to this, Director Kang slammed his shoe on the table very loudly and forcefully. The manager realized that his boss was in a bad mood and that he himself had just said something stupid. Kang Yu-pei asked if the manager understood that not all S ranks are created equal. He also promised to take down someone like Ju-yeon in 20 minutes. The manager, in fear, began to agree with the boss's words. Having delivered such a tirade, the boss twisted his face into a terrible smile and asked what the organization had said. The organization asked to convey that it could not increase payments due to events in Britain. Nevertheless, the association has publicly stated that it is carefully selecting the heroes it will send to deal with the problem. Boss Kan thought that it would be difficult to say that the payment was too low and get out of the mission, so he asked when they were leaving. A joint transfer with the Japanese heroes was planned. Boss Khan was just planning to meet Takeshi. Macassian was a new monster whose weakness no one had yet discovered. Well, almost no one. But Director Kang only thought that he would become much more influential once he dealt with this new monster. Desperate battles with monsters took place in Britain. The common people, who found themselves victims, fled headlong from the huge monster that was chasing them. High-level heroes were summoned to fight these new monsters. But even the squads of professional heroes were irritated by the power of this monster. The huge monster attacked with its mouth open and one of its paws raised to strike. The mantis's leg cut through the air currents with terrifying speed. The next second, the monster's attack landed on the ground right in the middle of the group. The heroes scattered to the sides, and then they took heart and rushed to attack. After all, there were more of them. The 5 heroes attacked the huge monster as if they were no longer afraid of death. Some of them even used strange magical powers, gathering energy for a new blow. After several minutes of fierce fighting, the blows finally reached the monster. The monster's eyes still glowed with living lights, but the monster fell to the ground, creating many cracks in the asphalt underneath it. The monster's head was cut off by a squad of heroes and thrown aside. The heroes must have spent too much energy fighting, as they all looked exhausted. The white-haired girl seemed to hear some more strange sounds and turned around. To everyone's surprise, there was another ferocious monster at the end of the street. The heroine, faced with such a sight immediately after the battle, panicked. She didn't even try to fight off the monster's new attack. Her face darkened. She had to save herself. The rain did not stop, and lightning continued to strike the same place every now and then. The heroes of Great Britain gave everything they had to stop the monsters from advancing any further, but they still had insufficient information about the enemy. The Cambridge front line had fallen. The monsters continued their advance, moving further and further into Britain. But this time there was something strange about them. The monster's eyes were still glowing, but the next moment the spark in his eyes simply went out, as if something had neutralized him. The second enraged monster assessed what was happening and raised his head to the sky. The monsters fell one after another without even fighting. It was as if something invisible had struck all their vital organs. A black helicopter flew over the mountains made of monster bodies. The team of heroes on the helicopter were none other than Ju Yan's team. Seeing the monsters fall dead, everyone began to thank Ju Yan for the advice about the red fire ant extract. Yupa couldn't understand how this girl was so knowledgeable. Ju Yan quickly put on a cheerful expression and ordered the team to finish this quickly. The next moment, a squad of heroes from Korea rushed into battle with the no longer dangerous monsters. Ju Yan drew her sword and was going to kill as many monsters as she could. After some time, the team of heroes had to return back to their homeland. At the airport, a crowd of journalists was already waiting for them, heatedly discussing their rescue of Britain. Onlookers couldn't believe how many reporters had come. The two men talked about Ju Yan's fame and how she had saved Great Britain. It was Ju Yan who found Makassian's weakness. There were rumors that the British royal family was going to knight this girl. Everyone fell silent, and the team of heroes who had flown with Ju Yan appeared at the threshold of the terminal. The girl walked at the head of the entire team and was stunned by the fact that she would have to answer so many reporters. One annoying reporter asked how Ju Yan found Makassian's weakness. Yupei was also interviewed a lot, in particular about how he killed the most Makassians. The group of heroes was photographed from all angles and broadcast on the news. After a long mission, it was torture. The news also said that the key to hunting these monsters was the distribution of red ant extract. Seo Do-jun watched the news broadcast from a large tower in the center of the city. He was either smiling or maintaining a neutral expression. But the next moment, a rather familiar face of Kang Yu-pi appeared on the screen, and Seo Do-jun's eyes immediately lit up with an unprecedented hatred for this man from the TV. There were many people sitting in a certain cafe. Some were working, while others were discussing something among themselves. One of the visitors gave his friend several bags that were filled to the brim. Seo Do-jun looked at the gift in surprise and then asked again. He was holding a small mug. Ju Yeon began pointing to the bags and saying where the gift was for Yoon Yeon and where it was for his grandmother. There was a gift for Seo Do-jun, too. He immediately decided to check what was there. Ju said that it would have been better to do it at home. Looking at the gift, Seo Do-jun said that it was some kind of expensive suit. It was bright gold. Ju Yeon said that Jun could consider it a gesture of gratitude since it was thanks to him that she became a heroine. Ju said that if Jun wanted, she could buy him a car. So Du replied that Hyun had helped him too. Ju Yeon asked if Jun would answer the question about how he knew about Makassian's weakness. Jun said that he didn't have to answer that. The girl sighed heavily in response. Hyun Ju Yeon then asked what Seo Do-jun plans to do next. The girl understood that if Jun was targeting Hong Hee or Kang Yu, the situation could get out of control, and she would be obliged to prevent it. Clearly not expecting to hear from Jun that he wanted to create peace throughout the world, the girl began to wait for an answer. But in the end, the guy just casually said that he wanted to buy a house first. The girl asked in surprise if the guy was really renting a place to live now. But before the eyes of some other man, there were only tall palm trees and the night sky. Beautiful girls in bathing suits were having fun around. They were playing with a ball in the pool, chatting and laughing. Kang Yun-pyo stood in the pool, embraced by two girls. He closed his eyes tiredly for a moment. He thought about Hyun Ju Yeon, deciding that she had become different, even if only slightly. Kang Yun-pyo recalled that Ju Yeon knew about Makassian's weaknesses, but she didn't even say a word about where from. Then the boy remembered their recent conversation. Kang asked Ju Yeon what kind of relationship she had with Seo Do-jun. The guy said that she had exposed the prosecutor just to get Jun out of jail. He also recalled that she was with Jun when Chul was beaten. Ju Yeon replied that Chael asked for it himself because he threw Jun into the gate and even struck first. Kang Yun-pyo chuckled and said that Chul was already doing stupid things for pennies, so he wouldn't be surprised if he died. Kang said that after all, Chul is his brother, so he has a reason to take revenge on Seo Do-jun. In response, the girl cast a tense glance at Kang Yun-pyo. She only frowned slightly. The man's eyes lit up with a bright red flame. He carefully watched Ju Yun's reaction. But suddenly the girl turned away, saying that he could do whatever he wanted because it was none of her business. The guy was surprised to realize that Ju Yun was not actually that close to Seo Do-jun. The girl said, adjusting her sleep mask, that she had no need to interfere with this. Now, looking at his drink, the man couldn't stop replaying her words in his head. Kang Yun-pyo knew that Seo Do-jun was probably hiding something. The boy tensed up for a moment. Meanwhile, a new rift has recently opened in England, and the Lincolnshire area has been devastated by a wave of monsters. The UK Heroes Association scrambled to get more stones and sent heroes into the rift. The man said that if they had fire ant extract, even they with D rank could kill the Macasians. Another man agreed, saying that if they had stopped that wave at the very beginning, there would have been more stones. The rifts from which the wave had already burst could not be turned into gates. The heroes said that it was very scary not to know what kind of monster would emerge, because entire countries had already been wiped out. One guy thought he heard someone come out. Another guy suggested it might be an expedition team. But considering that it was still too early, the heroes continued the fast. They decided that the Monostone hunters would soon arrive. But then, suddenly, someone really began to emerge from the rift, tearing apart the space. Only then did the man turn around in horror, looking at the rift. His eyes widened. The other hero had exactly the same reaction. He froze in place, not daring to move because of fear. Something resembling a man came out to them. Deep scars spread across his face, and his body seemed to be made of iron. The monster's eyes glowed purple, and its skin took on a pink tint. Energy smoked around it. The man exclaimed that this was clearly not a hero, and they needed to contact headquarters immediately. The monster's hand was greenish in color. He extended it forward, creating a strange circle in the air. Then many more of the same green circles appeared in the air. They surrounded the two heroes. And then the men rose up in the air. The monster walked on, ignoring their screams. One of the heroes decided to use a weapon. The man cursed loudly and swung with all his might. The two men were still in the monster's power. Trying to catch up with him, the boy threw 3 knives towards the monster. But of course the monster easily repelled the attack. He was dressed in a shabby coat and pants. The guy said that these heroes were just trash. His long black hair began to flutter in the wind. And then the man suddenly clenched his fist, causing his magic circle to suddenly break. A second later, the heroes began to cough up blood and scream from the pain that suddenly pierced their bodies. After a few more moments, the man extended his hand forward. His nails resembled animal claws. Then the man's fingers seemed to sparkle, and purple particles of mana began to appear around it. A phone began to appear before the monster's eyes. It was as if the monster was creating a gadget in the air. He noticed the percentage written on the screen. It was 19.26. The monster whispered that 10 years had passed in this world's time, but it still hadn't reached even 20%. The monster asked if this was really a failure, even after all he had gone through to create the spatial rifts. But suddenly the body that lay behind the monster turned to him. The man asked what it was. The monster chuckled and said that he had some things to do before raising his mana concentration. And in a moment the hero's body was dismembered into several parts. Blood splashes appeared around. The monster chuckled, saying that he should get rid of the pathetic bugs first.